Hey guys, tonight we're going way off grid, like no cell signal, can't see the nearest human, watch out for wolves off grid. You're stepping out into the wild, unclaimed heart of the American frontier. No grocery stores, no neighbours, no help, just you, your gear, and the same vast, unrelenting wilderness pressing in from all sides. You've got to build your shelter, feed yourself, avoid dying of exposure, and maybe, just maybe, carve out a little corner of the forest to call your own. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. But hey, it'll be fun while it lasts, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. I just want to keep bringing you these journeys into strange, dusty corners of history while you're winding down for the night. Also, drop your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I always get a kick out of seeing how far this reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't really know the exact moment it hits you, but standing at the edge of a narrow game trail, staring into a sweeping valley surrounded by ancient pine forests and jagged peaks, the realization finally sets in. This is it. There's no going back. The last trading post is 100 miles behind you, and the only thing ahead is land, raw, untouched, and waiting for someone foolish enough to try taming it. That someone is you. Your boots crunch into frosty soil as you step off the trail and start descending into the valley. The morning air slices through your coat like a whisper with sharp teeth. It's quiet here, unnervingly so. You hear the soft creak of tall trees, the rush of a distant stream, and the occasional startled flutter of birds taking off just ahead. But otherwise, nothing, no signs of other people, no sounds of civilization. Just your own breath and the overwhelming sense that you've officially crossed a threshold. You're not visiting the wilderness, you're living into it. The pack on your back isn't exactly light. You've got the bare essentials: a hatchet, a long rifle, a flint striker, some salt, a whetstone, and a couple of animal traps. There's a bundle of blankets, a small cast iron pot dangling from your pack frame, and tucked deep into the bottom, a folded oilcloth journal and a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. Because irony, you guess. You scan the valley for a place to set up temporary camp. You're not ready to build yet. First, you need to get a feel for the land, where the sun hits, where the water flows, and what might already be living nearby that doesn't appreciate unexpected guests. You choose a flat rise near the edge of the tree line, sheltered on three sides by tall rock and brush. There's a cold breeze, but the elevation gives you a decent vantage point. You'll sleep light tonight, too light probably. As the sun dips behind the peaks, you get a fire going. Clumsy at first, but after some swearing and second-guessing your life choices, the sparks catch. A small orange glow grows against the dark, and for a brief moment it feels like victory. You heat some water, toss in dried meat and a few crumbles of root vegetable you carried in, and pretend it's a stew. It tastes like burnt leather and sadness, but it's warm, and that's good enough. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howls. You freeze. It's far, but not too far. You stare into the fire and remind yourself, you're a mountain man now. This is part of the deal. Cold, isolation, danger, and the ever-present fear that you're not quite as prepared as you told yourself. You shift your rifle closer and roll into your blanket, the warmth of the fire licking at your back and the vastness of night pressing in from the other side. Here's the thing. You're not the first to try this. Men have been coming into the mountains for centuries, drawn by furs, freedom, or just a desperate desire to escape something. Some made it, some didn't, and most of them, they didn't have some neatly organised homestead blueprint tucked in their coat. They improvised. They fought the land, they learned from it, and when that didn't work, they learned to live with it. There's something weirdly calming about that thought as you drift off. You're part of a long, messy tradition of people who looked around at the comforts of society and said, "Nah, I'd rather freeze alone in the woods with a musket and a dream." Historical fact for the night. The earliest mountain men in the American West were fur trappers, most active between 1810 and 1840, working for companies like the Hudson's Bay or the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. Their job? Wander through unexplored regions, trap beaver and haul the pelts back, often hundreds of miles, through everything from hostile terrain to snowstorms and stampedes. Their cabins, if they built any at all, were temporary and brutal. Quirky twist, some mountain men never left the woods, like ever. There are documented cases of trappers going decades without returning to civilization. One guy was so gone that when asked what year it was, he guessed 2 decades off. That's not living off the grid. That's becoming part of the dirt. And here's a juicy debate for your sleepy little brain. Did these men really love the wilderness, or were they running from something? Historians argue both sides. Some say the mountain men were early American heroes, gritty, self-reliant pioneers. Others, they say most of them were debt-dodging loners, traumatized war vets, or just wildly incompatible with polite society. Maybe both are true, maybe none of it matters when you're sleeping in the woods trying not to freeze. Either way, you're here now. Welcome to the Wilderness Builder. Your work begins at dawn. Morning comes slowly in the mountains, like the sun isn't entirely sure it wants to get up either. The sky turns a pale silver before you see any colour, and then, just barely, gold spills over the peaks and paints the treetops. You wake up stiff, half frozen, and covered in a fine dusting of frost that's crept over your blanket like a rude cat. There's a distinct feeling in your spine that suggests the ground is not as forgiving as a featherbed. You stretch, wince, and start moving, because lying still will only make the cold worse. Your breath fogs the air as you stamp around the fire pit and stir last night's coals back to life. It's a little victory. Every morning fire is, really, and the warmth is a promise that you can in fact survive one more day out here. But don't get cocky. You've got a lot to do before this place becomes even remotely habitable. And step 1, find the right spot to build. Scouting a cabin site isn't just about picking the first pretty patch of grass with a mountain view. You're not on Airbnb, you need practicality over poetry. Sun exposure matters, especially come winter. South-facing slopes are gold because they catch sunlight all day. That means a warmer cabin and less snow build-up. Shade may sound nice now, but in a month you'll be sabbing into your jerky as your firewood burns too fast and your breath turns to icicles. You also need water, close but not too close. A nearby stream means you won't be hauling sloshing buckets across miles of uneven ground, but settle too close to the bank and you risk spring floods turning your cabin into a very set canoe. Plus, streams attract animals, some helpful, some not. You want to fish and fill a pot, not wrestle a moose in your underwear. The slope of the land matters too. Flat ground is ideal for building, but a little incline is helpful for drainage. You don't want to discover mid-blizzard that your floor turns into a muddy indoor river every time snow melts. So you wander. Hours maybe. Days, if you're particular. Which out here is allowed. Being picky can be the difference between a cabin that lasts 10 years and one that collapses mid-snowstorm while you're inside it. Eventually, you find a spot. It's not perfect. Nothing out here is. But it's good. A south-facing rise, about 50 yards from a shallow creek that glitters in the morning light. There's a dense stand of pine and spruce just uphill, which means you won't have to drag logs far, and the ground has a gentle slope that rolls down toward the water. There's elk scat nearby, but no signs of predators. At least none you can identify, which is both comforting and vaguely unsettling. You mark the site with a few stones and branches, then sit for a while, just listening. The forest isn't zwamument exactly, but it feels quiet. The kind of quiet that soaks into your bones. You can hear a hawk calling somewhere overhead, and there's the rhythmic, gentle thud of a woodpecker hammering away at a dead tree. The breeze carries the smell of pine needles, damp earth, and distant cold. This place feels right. Now that the location's chosen, it's time to plan the layout. Cabin building is an architecture. It's survival with structure. You sketch a rough outline in the dirt with a stick, estimating space by pacing it out. You're aiming for something modest, maybe 12 by 16 feet, enough room to sleep and eat, store gear, and avoid going stir-crazy when winter locks you in for days. Any bigger, and the work triples. Any smaller, and you'll be spooning your rifle for warmth. You mentally map out where the hearth will go, which wall will hold the door, and how to position the roof to shed snow instead of collecting it. You try to visualize how sunlight will fall through the doorway, how smoke will rise and, hopefully, leave through the chimney instead of your lungs. It's a strange thing, planning a structure in the middle of nowhere, with no measuring tape, no nails, and no help. Just you and your stubborn belief that you can make 4 walls and a roof out of nothing but trees and elbow grease. Of course, your mountain men weren't always solitary saints of self-reliance. Some worked in pairs or small crews, especially when it came to heavy lifting. But many preferred to go it alone, relying on sheer willpower and a little bit of reckless optimism. There's a famous like a infamous story about a trapper in the Bitterroots who built his cabin upside down, somehow. He laid the roof logs first and tried to stack the walls under them. When it all collapsed, he reportedly shrugged and slept in the rubble for a week until he could try again. So no pressure, just don't build the roof first. Here's your historical fact for the evening. In the early 1800s, mountain men building their own cabins often borrowed techniques from Scandinavian immigrants like the saddle notch corner joint. It allowed for stable walls without nails, just gravity, friction, and good craftsmanship. These joints, once locked together with axe precision, could withstand wind, snow, and even bear shoves, most of the time. Your quirky twist? Some trappers believed in burying a piece of iron under the cabin threshold to ward off evil spirits and misfortune. A bent horseshoe, an old trap spring, even a rusted musket ball, whatever they had. Because when you live alone in the woods, superstition starts feeling a lot like insurance. And here's your scholarly toss-up. Was site selection mostly instinct, or did mountain men follow a mental checklist passed down through company training or word of mouth? Some argue the experienced trappers learned by copying older men. Others say it was all trial and error. Survive one winter, learn from the mistakes, and rebuild smarter next time. Since few kept written journals and most lived isolated lives, historians can only guess. You sit back on a mossy log looking over the spot where your cabin will rise. It's nothing yet, just grass, sticks, and shadows. But you can almost see the walls already, rough-hewn, maybe crooked in places, but solid, warm, yours. You sit there a while, sketching your imaginary cabin into the dirt with a stick, but eventually the stick snaps, and the forest reminds you, gently but firmly, that daydreams don't split logs. Time to talk about tools. And no, you're not pulling out a power drill or swinging by the hardware store. Out here, your entire toolkit has to fit on your back, serve multiple purposes, and ideally not kill you if you use it wrong. That last part? Optional, apparently. You open your gear roll and lay everything out on a flat rock like a surgeon prepping for backward surgery. There's your axe. The star of the show. It's worn but solid, with a blade that sings when it catches the light and a handle you've wrapped in rawhide for grip. You run your fingers along the edge, not too sharp yet. That'll change. You'll be spending a lot of time with this thing, and it deserves the kind of respect usually reserved for elders and snakes. Beside it lies your belt knife. It's heavy, with a bone handle and a wide blade that's done everything from skinning a deer to carving spoons. You've even used it to shave once. That was a mistake you're still emotionally recovering from. Then there's the froe, an L-shaped tool for splitting logs into planks. Most people today have never even heard of one, but back then, if you wanted a flatboard, you didn't saw it. You broke it with this thing and a wooden mallet you made yourself. Charming, right? You also brought an auger bit, basically an old-school hand drill, for boring holes in logs to peg them together. No screws, no nails, just wood on wood, tight and locked by tension the way your back will feel after 2 hours of hauling timber. Some mountain men carried saws too, a buck saw or a folding bow saw if they were lucky. Problem is, saws dull fast, and sharpening one properly takes the patience of a saint and the eyesight of an eagle. Still though, a saw can save you hours if you're building furniture or want your cabin doorway to not look like it was gnawed open by a beaver on something stronger than bark. You look over your gear again and feel a kind of nervous pride. This is it. These are the tools that'll shape your shelter, your table, your bed, and probably at least one regrettable injury. Out here, every tool is a friend, or an enemy depending on the day. You spend the morning honing your axe, grinding it carefully with your whetstone. The motion is almost meditative. Slow circles, rinse, repeat. You test it on a sapling and the blade bites deep clean. Satisfying. Like slicing through butter that's seen some things. Once you've tuned everything up, you fashion a simple shaving horse from a downed log and some pegs, giving you a makeshift workstation. It's not pretty, but you can sit on it and hold wood with your knees while you shape it. Bonus, it makes you feel like a craftsman, even if your first attempt at shaping a log ended with splinters in places no one should have splinters. Midday, the sun breaks through the clouds, and you take a break to clean your gear. The oil you use smells like pine tar and smoke, and you rub it into the axe head and blade handles like you're moisturizing a dry bear. The forest is quiet, but there's a rhythm to your work that keeps your thoughts from drifting too far into the what-ifs. Tools are honest. If you treat them right, they usually don't let you down. That said, there's no official standard kit for a mountain man. Some went into the wilderness with barely more than an axe and a musket. Others, usually those working with fur companies, carried large packs with specialized tools, if they could afford the weight. There are recorded cases of trappers using broken musket barrels as makeshift chisels or reshaping old traps into scrapers and draw knives. Improvisation wasn't a backup plan, it was the default setting. Historical fact for this evening: the typical mountain man's tool roll might include only 3 or 4 real tools: an axe, a knife, an auger, and maybe a small draw knife. Everything else was made in the field, scavenged or adapted. They sharpened blades on river stones, boiled pine resin to seal cracks, and lashed broken handles with sinew or green wood. Quirky twist. Some trappers were superstitious about their tools. There are journals describing men who refused to use another man's axe, claiming it would bring bad luck, or worse, bad blisters. One famous mountain man, Old Bill Williams, supposedly named every tool he owned. His favourite fro was called Lucinda. And yes, he talked to her like a real person. Frankly, after a few weeks alone in the woods, you get it, B. And for your scholarly itch, historians still debate whether frontier toolkits were standard issue for company men or completely personal. Fur companies like Ashley's or the Hudson's Bay may have distributed basic kits to trappers, but outlaws and solo wanderers, they packed what they could afford or what they could steal. Some argue that the lack of uniformity in surviving tool records points to a culture of total improvisation, where innovation was king and no two men built alike. You take one last look at your assembled tools, feeling that strange mix of satisfaction and dread. Because while they might look nice and clean now, they're about to get dirtier than a raccoon in a root cellar. Tomorrow you start cutting trees, real, massive, green-limbed monsters that don't exactly want to fall down and become your walls. You'll need every ounce of strength, every trick you know, and a very real tolerance for sap in your eyebrows. But that's tomorrow's nightmare. For now, you oil your axe, whisper something kind to it, nothing weird, just a little gratitude, and stretch your sore legs. The sky is turning pink, and the first stars are peeking out like gossiping neighbours. You've got your tools, you've got your spot. All you need now is a lot of luck and an even bigger pile of firewood. Sleep well, builder. Tomorrow the forest gets smaller. You wake to birdsong and the scent of damp earth, your breath fogging slightly in the morning chill. For one brief stupid second, you let yourself believe today might be relaxing. Then your eyes flick over to the axe lying by the fire pit, and reality slaps you with a splintered glove. Today you start felling trees, real ones. Not those polite little saplings you clear with a few swings, but thick-trunked, knotted old beasts that have stood here longer than your entire family tree. There's something deeply personal about choosing your first tree. You don't just march up and swing, no, you stand there, boots in the loam, hand on your hip, squinting up through branches as if the tree will volunteer. You want one that's tall, straight, and about a foot in diameter. Too wide and you'll hate yourself, too narrow and it won't hold heat. And it needs to be close enough to drag, but not so close that its fall might flatten your skull or take out the 3 saplings you were kind of hoping to turn into a fence someday. You find your candidate, a spruce tall and proud, about 30 feet uphill from the cabin site. It's got a slight lean, which is good. Leaning trees are more likely to fall where you want them to. The bark is rough under your fingers, and the smell of sap is sharp, clean, and a little bitter. You mutter something like a half apology, maybe a blessing, depends how much sleep you got. Then you swing. The axe bites deep, the thunk reverberates through your arms. You step back, pivot, swing again. Soon you find a rhythm, a primal, sweaty dance of steel and wood, sweat and breath. Chips fly, your shoulders burn, your hands blister. It's not glamorous. It's a process that makes you question every life choice you've ever made. You switch sides, work the notch into a wedge, angling it toward the open space where you want the tree to land. By midday your shirt is soaked. Your arms are shaking and the tree is groaning just a little. You make your final back cut and then step back, heart pounding. For a moment nothing. Then a creak, a crack, a sound like bones snapping in slow motion. The tree begins to tip and the forest holds its breath. It crashes down with a thunderous thud, sending birds scattering and dust rising. It didn't hit anything important. You whisper a silent thank you to the tree or the forest or whatever keeps you from being crushed. One down. About 30 more to go. Felling one tree is hard, felling many is borderline ridiculous. But a log cabin needs logs, and unless you've got a team of oxen, spoiler, you don't. Every single tree will be felled, trimmed, and dragged by your own 2 legs. The rule of thumb, You'll want around 50 to 60 logs depending on cabin size. Each one has to be roughly the same diameter, straight and long enough to span the length or width of your walls, which means a lot of walking, a lot of chopping, and a lot of awkward dragging. Once a tree's down, the work doesn't stop. You limit, chopping off all the branches with as much grace as a man trying to swat flies with a pool cue. Then you trim it to size, judge its straightness, and start planning where it'll go in the wall stack. You begin laying them out near the build site like some enormous, heavy puzzle you'll regret starting about 5 logs in. Here's the part they never show in those woodsy survival documentaries: dragging logs sucks. No matter how clever you get, rolling them on branches, fashioning crude sleds, tying ropes around your waist, it's still you versus hundreds of pounds of dead weight. And the logs don't care about your feelings. You try everything. A pry bar made from a forked branch, greased runners, a prayer whispered between cuss words. Eventually you settle into a grudging truce with gravity and muscle through it, slowly. The sun slides across the sky as you cut, trim and haul, each task blurring into the next. Your boots scuff trails into the earth. Your gloves wear through, and still you go back for one more log, then another, then one more just because you told yourself you'd finish this section today. You're nothing if not stubborn. Here's your historical fact for the evening. In frontier America, many log cabins weren't built with fresh green wood. That's a modern myth. In truth, most mountain men preferred to cut trees in late fall or winter, when sap levels were low, and let the log season, or dry, for several months. This made them lighter, less likely to warp, and less prone to rot. But if time was tight, greenwood it was, and greenwood is heavy, like ruin your spine heavy. Now for the quirky twist. Some builders in the Appalachian backwoods had a tradition of placing a coin under the stump of the first tree they cut for a cabin. It was a blessing, a hope for prosperity, health, and maybe fewer splinters. Others carved their initials into the base of that first log before it was even placed, like tagging your name on a cathedral of sweat and stubbornness. And tonight's scholarly squabble, whether early frontiersmen relied more on brute force or technique when it came to felling and moving logs. Some argue that experienced builders used leverage tricks, wedges, and terrain to their advantage. Others suggest most were just absurdly strong, fueled a day by desperation, jerky, and spite. Since few diaries mention how they moved all that timber, only that they did, we're left to guess and wince in sympathy. By the time the sun dips below the ridge, you've felled 6 trees. They're stripped, measured to njadjor, and stacked neatly near the building site, a tribute to your aching back and questionable decision-making. You sit down, sweaty and sore, leaning against one of your future walls. Your hands are blistered, your shirt is torn, and there's sap in your hair. You feel exhausted and proud and slightly delirious. You watch the sky go from gold to navy to ink. Stars blink on, one by one, and the forest returns to its quiet, watchful self. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls out, long and low. You raise your canteen in a lazy salute and take a swig. You've got the trees. You've got the tools, and somehow, against all odds, you're still alive. Tomorrow you'll strip bark and start laying the foundation. But for now, you close your eyes and rest your head against the cool, solid promise of timber. The dawn comes slow and fog-draped, with pale light sifting through the trees like it's afraid to disturb you. Your muscles protest the moment you so much as blink. Everything hurts, the kind of full-body ache that makes you consider spending the day lying face down in moss. But no such luxury exists out here. You've got logs to prep. And the only thing lazier than you this morning is the pile of timber waiting to become walls. Today's job? Debarking. Sounds easy, right? Spoiler, it isn't. You haul yourself upright, stretch till your spine makes a noise like an old door hinge, and shuffle over to the logs you felled yesterday. They lie there smugly, heavy and raw, their bark still clinging tight like the forest itself hasn't quite let go. That's where your draw knife or bark spud comes in, if you have one. Otherwise, it's just your belt knife and a lot of time spent arguing with trees. You start at one end of a log and wedge the blade beneath the bark, pulling in long, slow strips. It peels away with a damp, stringy sound. Like tearing wet paper. Underneath, the wood is pale and smooth, almost cold to the touch. It smells clean and sharp, spruce and earth and that deep green scent that only comes from the guts of trees. The bark curls away in sheets, sometimes whole, sometimes in annoying little slivers that stick to your hands like woodsy confetti. You keep going, one log then another, bark off, sap sticky on your fingers, shoulders burning. You find yourself slipping into a trance, the repetition of the motion, the sound of blade against bark, the soft thump of the scraps hitting the dirt. It's almost meditative in the way that slowly losing your mind can be. Debarking isn't just cosmetic, it's practical. Left on, bark invites insects, carpenter ants, beetles, worms that would love nothing more than to turn your future cabin into a chew toy. Bark also holds moisture, which invites rot. And rot, as it turns out, doesn't care about your dreams. So the bark has to go, even if it means hours of scraping, sweating, and the growing suspicion that trees evolve bark specifically to spite humans. By midday, your shirt is clinging to your back, your hands are raw, and you've developed a deep personal hatred for the phrase simple living. You pause for a break, collapsing onto a half-cleaned log and pulling out the chunk of jerky you saved from yesterday. It tastes like shoe leather marinated in regret, but you chew anyway. Hunger's an effective seasoning. As you eat, you think about how old-timers might have done this. Some cabins used logs that were only debarked on the interior side, leaving the exterior bark on for insulation or aesthetics. Others peeled everything, planning to seal the smooth logs with chinking later. Either way, bark was the dividing line between a log and a building material, between nature and intention. You turn back to your logs and keep going. The pile of bark scraps grows into a shaggy mound at your feet. You save some strips, thicker ones, for future kindling, or maybe basket weaving if you get truly bored or weird. You've heard of mountain men using curled bark as insulation, stuffing it into cracks along with moss or animal hair. Basically, if it comes off a tree and doesn't bite, it's building material. Here's your historical fact. Many cabins built by trappers, explorers and settlers were made with peeled logs, not just for durability, but for fire resistance. Bark is flammable and holds embers, while clean wood is much less likely to catch during a stray spark from the hearth. Out here, one gust of wind and a careless pea could turn a year's labour into a pile of sad ashes. So yeah, peeled logs, kind of a big deal, ready for something quirky? In some parts of the Appalachians and Ozarks, debarking was considered a job for the young and dumb, an unkind term for newcomers who hadn't yet earned their stripes. You'd get handed a draw knife and told to, "Go bark that log, son," while the older hands drank from a jug and supervised. Out here, though, you are the youngest and the oldest hand. So congratulations, you win both roles. And now, the scholarly debate of the night. Was debarking always done on site, or did some trappers fell trees elsewhere and drag them in later? Historians are torn. Some evidence suggests that frontier builders would peel trees where they dropped wood to avoid hauling extra weight. Others argue that seasoned trappers selected and prepped logs near rivers, or paths for easier transport. The truth? Probably both, depending on terrain, weather, and just how badly someone didn't want to drag wet bark uphill. By late afternoon, the logs look different. They've gone from rough forest giants to clean, ready timbers, almost like bones waiting to be stacked into the skeleton of your future home. You run your hand along the grain of the wood, feeling where knots rise and dips run like rivers. You start noticing which logs are straight, which ones curve slightly, which ends will make the best corners. You're learning the language of timber one blister at a time. With the bark gone, the logs start to feel like yours. Not nature's anymore, not just part of the forest. Yours to stack, shape and sleep inside. Yours to fight winter with. Yours to outlast. Evening creeps in, slow and golden, dusting the cleared logs with warm light. You build a small fire, just enough to heat some water and warm your bones. As the flames crackle and the shadows stretch, you look at your growing stack of peeled logs and feel, just for a moment, ahead of the game. Not by much, but enough. The stars come out early tonight, scattered across a deep velvet sky. You lean back against a stripped log, its surface cool and dry, and stare up at the night. The ache in your arms is still there, but it's a good ache now. Honest. Earned. Tomorrow you start laying the foundation. That's when things get real. That's when these logs stop being a pile of wood and start becoming a shelter. But for now, you let the night settle in around you, the fire popping gently, the logs gleaming faintly in the starlight like sleeping giants waiting to rise. The next morning you wake to the sound of wind threading through the trees and a woodpecker somewhere nearby trying to turn a branch into sawdust. You stretch, groaning like a floorboard, and shuffle toward the logs with a groggy sense of purpose. Today's the day you stop thinking about building and actually start stacking something. Not just a pile of logs, but a shape, a footprint, a cabin-sized declaration that you are, against all common sense, really doing this. Laying the foundation is one of those deceptively simple tasks. On paper, it's easy. Place a few big logs, get them level, and build upward. In reality, it's more like playing Jenga with tree trunks while gravity tries to ruin your life. First, you clear the build site of debris, branches, rocks, that weird clump of moss you almost stepped on barefoot once. You grab a shovel and start leveling the earth, hacking at roots and stomping the dirt flat. You dig small trenches where your foundation logs will rest, deep enough to prevent shifting, shallow enough to not turn into water troughs when it rains. Most cabins start with a sill log on each side, a heavy, straight piece of timber that anchors the structure. You pick 2 of your straightest logs, thick and proud, and drag them into place like dragging sleeping oxen. One false step and you'll roll your own ankle or pin your foot under 200 pounds of irony. You roll the first log into the trench and step back. It's not perfect, but it's close. You scrape some dirt here, wedge a rock there, and lean down to sight along its length. And that's when you realise something important. Level is a myth. Or, at least, it's highly negotiable when you're working with tools made of wood and dreams. You squint, adjust, swear softly, and do your best. Then you bring in the second sill log for the opposite wall, repeating the whole process with more dirt, more leverage, and a stick you've declared your unofficial measuring device. Once the sills are in place, you test their squareness by pacing between the ends and pretending you remember geometry. You tie a bit of twine from corner to corner and check the angles by eye, then adjust slightly when one log ends up looking like it's drifting toward Canada. Finally, it looks, well, not straight, but stable enough that it probably won't collapse while you sleep. Probably. Next comes the fun part, placing the first cross logs to form a rectangle. This is where you get to pretend you're a structural engineer while standing on uneven ground, hoisting timber, and balancing like a drunken lumberjack. You pick up the shorter logs, your cabin's going to be rectangular, remember, and heave one end onto the sill. Then you walk it forward, end over end, trying not to roll it back downhill with your foot in the way. You repeat the process for the other side, and suddenly, there it is, a frame. A rectangle of clean peeled logs resting gently on dirt, rock, and the thinnest thread of hope. Laying these first few logs feels weirdly emotional. There are the bottom bones of what's going to be your shelter, your refuge. You crouch next to one, run your hand along the wood, and think about the 1,000 little moments that are going to happen inside this space. Fires crackling, storms pounding the roof, maybe even laughing at your own jokes to keep the cold out. Now, if you were a fancy settler back east, you might be pouring concrete or laying brick. But you're not. You're a mountain man with a sore back and too many thoughts, building on packed earth and hand-placed stones. Some trappers used rock piers to elevate the cabin slightly and allow for air circulation and fewer mice. Others just dug into the slope and prayed for dry weather. You go with the stones, stacking flat ones beneath each corner to give the log some lift. It feels solid, until you sit on one and it shifts, nearly taking you with it. More adjusting, more cursing. You're building a cabin, but you're also building character. Unfortunately, both take forever. Here's your historical fact. Early American log cabins were often built directly on the ground, but the smartest builders elevated the sills on stones or short piers to prevent moisture from creeping in and rotting the wood. Some used limestone, others whatever was nearby. The result? Cabins that lasted decades or crumbled in 2 winters, depending on how smart you were. Now for your quirky twist, some mountain men, especially those living truly alone, would bury charms under the foundation. Small bones, carved sticks, even coins or teeth. Not for decoration, but for protection. A superstition maybe, or just a way to feel like someone, or something, had your back out here in the unforgiving woods. And here's a debate for your mental campfire. Was building the foundation the hardest part, or just the beginning of a much bigger headache? Scholars argue about whether laying the first log set the tone for the whole build. Get it level and square and everything else goes smoothly. Mess it up and you'll spend the next month improvising your way around a crooked cabin with a sagging roof. It's like sourdough starters for carpenters. You get one shot at getting it right before the whole thing collapses. With the foundation in place and the sun beginning to dip, you take a moment to walk around the perimeter. It's humble, rough, uneven in places, but it's real. You made something today that wasn't here yesterday. Something that will hold walls, a roof, and you, ideally dry, preferably alive. You gather some of the leftover bark scraps, stack them by the fire pit, and sit down for the evening. Your body is tired in a way that only comes from doing something that matters. The ache in your legs isn't misery, it's proof. You didn't just survive another day, you built the start of a home, As stars begin to crowd the sky and the trees whisper around you, you pull your blanket tighter and let your eyes drift toward the rectangle of logs, barely visible in the firelight. It's not much to look at yet, but it will be. The sun isn't even up yet when you're awakened by something crawling across your foot. It's probably harmless, maybe a beetle, maybe a very ambitious mouse, but you bolt upright like the dirt's on fire. Just one of the many joys of sleeping outdoors while your house is still more concept than structure. You swat at your blanket, mumble something about cursed wilderness roommates, and then remember, today is notch day. That's right, time to carve out the joints that will let your logs lock together like puzzle pieces made of exhaustion. You sit up slowly, already feeling the strain in your shoulders from yesterday, and make your way over to the stack of peeled logs. They're solid, smooth, and quietly judging you. You can almost hear them whispering, "We'll fall apart if you mess this up." The corners of a log cabin are everything. They're what hold the whole structure together. No nails, no screws, just wood on wood, joined at the ends with notches that interlock like giant wooden Lincoln logs. There are a few main types: the simple round notch, the saddle notch, and the fancy pants dovetail. Each one comes with its own set of pros, cons, and levels of back pain. You plop down next to your log pile and stare at your first candidate. This log has been through a lot. You felled it, peeled it, dragged it uphill, and now it's about to get a haircut. You pull out your chalk and mark the ends where you'll cut the notches. You've chosen the saddle notch, classic, sturdy, and forgiving if you mess it up, mostly. The process is part art, part geometry, and part blind faith. First, you use your axe and draw knife to shape a curved saddle into the top side of each log end, basically a rounded U-shaped dip. This allows the next log to sit snugly into it. You want a tight fit, tight enough to hold firm, but not so tight that the wood splits when you hammer it together. Because nothing says I hate myself like splitting a perfectly good log 6 feet up the wall. You go slow, mark, cut, test, adjust. You place one log onto another to see how the notches align, then pull it off again when it rocks like a seesaw. You chip away a little more, test again, closer. You do this over and over, until finally it locks into place with a satisfying thud that makes your spine tingle. Not from the noise, from all the bending and lifting. As the day wears on, you fall into a rhythm. Cut, check, fit, swear, adjust. Eventually you've got a few corner logs notched and stacked, and the cabin starts to rise from the dirt like it finally believes in your dreams. You step back and see the beginnings of walls, actual corners. This thing has shape now. It's not just a pile of future splinters, it's a building, or at least it wants to be. But not everyone agreed on the best notch. Here's your historical fact. The saddle notch, while common, was rivaled by the dovetail notch in many regions, especially among more skilled builders. The dovetail interlocked logs at a sloping angle that prevented them from shifting outward over time. It was stronger, yes, but harder to cut and easier to screw up. It's also a serious commitment. Once you start dovetailing, there's no turning back without recutting every single log. Mountain men, often working alone or in pairs, typically went for the simpler saddle or round notches, easier, faster, and forgiving of hangovers. Now here's your quirky twist. Some trappers and early settlers didn't bother notching logs at all. They just stacked them like firewood and nailed or pegged vertical posts at the corners to hold everything together. These false corners worked okay, until wind, snow, or a curious bear decided to stress test your architecture. But hey, sometimes desperation trumps tradition. And your scholarly debate of the night, was the notch choice driven by geography or culture? Some historians argue that immigrants brought specific techniques from their homelands, Scandinavians favouring saddle notches, Scots bringing square notch styles, and Germans preferring dovetails. Others say it was less about ancestry and more about what the terrain allowed. If your region had softwoods, you might opt for deeper interlocking joints. Hardwoods, maybe you keep it simple and just try not to throw your back out. As you work, you start to notice how each log has its own personality. One cuts clean, another splits in weird ways. Some feel stubborn, grain twisting, knots lurking just where your chisel wants to land, but you learn to read them, the way they sound under the blade, the way the grain pulls. You start working with the wood, not just on it. By late afternoon, you've stacked up to the third row of logs. Your cabin's starting to look cozy? No, not yet. But it looks possible, which in this setting might as well be a miracle. You take a break and sit on the corner of your growing wall, legs dangling over the side like a kid on a porch. The view's not bad, trees swaying creak nearby, and your tools scattered in what might generously be called organised chaos. The smell of fresh-cut wood clings to your clothes and skin, and you realise something. This cabin is going to smell amazing. Even if it leaks, even if the roof's crooked, it's going to smell like pine and effort. As the light fades, you place one last log, notched and ready, then pack up your tools and stoke a small fire nearby. You eat something that could charitably be called stew, though it's mostly hot water with a bone in it. Still, you're too tired to care. Your body's tired in the way that feels earned, used, not broken, just deeply borrowed. You look back at your work one more time before you bed down. 3 logs high, corners locked like they mean it. The start of walls, the start of a home. Tomorrow, more notches, more lifting, maybe a few more arguments with gravity. But tonight you sleep knowing the cabin has begun to rise, log by log, notch by notch, against the quiet resistance of the wild. You wake up to the sound of something soft falling, like ash or feathers. Turns out it's neither. It's the first snow, just a dusting, the kind that melts the second it touches your skin, but still. It's a gentle reminder from nature that she's got a schedule of her own, and your cabin isn't on it. You blink into the pale morning light, watching flakes swirl lazily down between the trees, and suddenly feel the pressure ratchet up about 4 notches. You need walls, real ones, now. The good news is, you've got the first few logs locked together at the corners, thanks to yesterday's carving frenzy. The bad news? That's like calling 3 bricks a castle. The next stage is wall raising, heaving each log into place, aligning the notches just right and hoping nothing slips and crushes your femur. It's the point where the cabin starts to look like a real building. It's also where you're most likely to throw your back out and start questioning your whole relationship with the concept of shelter. You get to work early, muscles stiff and cold, breath fogging in the air as you shuffle logs into position. Each one is heavy. Heavier than yesterday somehow, as if they absorb your dread. You use a makeshift ramp and a couple of poles as levers to roll and lift the next course of logs up onto the growing walls. There's no crane, no team of buddies, just your stubborn hands, your increasingly creative use of tree branches, and the physics of leverage, which it turns out are both your best friend and your most passive-aggressive enemy. Each log gets placed, adjusted, coaxed into its notch with the precision of a surgeon and the language of a sailor. Sometimes it fits perfectly, more often it rocks like a boat in a storm or refuses to drop at all. You grab your chisel and knock off a few stubborn edges, curse the knot in the middle, and try again. Eventually the log seats itself with a satisfying thunk, the kind of noise that makes your ears perk up like a proud parent hearing their kid's first words. By midday the cabin's up to shoulder height on 2 sides. Not bad. The interior starts to take shape. You can almost picture where the hearth will go, how the light will fall through the doorway, where you might hang your coat or stash your rifle. But then the wind picks up, sending snowflakes sideways. And you remember this isn't HGTV, this is survival. Every log you lift is a race against time, and here's where things get dicey. Stacking logs solo means you have to improvise. You lash together a crude lifting tripod from 3 long saplings, tie a pulley to the top and run some cordage through it. With this rig you can hoist logs high enough to drop them onto the upper courses. It's not elegant. It creaks, groans, and threatens to snap with every load. But it works. Well, mostly. Eventually you get into a rhythm. Roll the log, align it, hoist, adjust, drop it into the notch. Tap it with a mallet. Step back, admire, repeat. Your cabin's bones begin to rise, course by course, each layer a little taller, each corner a little stronger. The notches lock together like gears, and with every log your world gets a little less exposed. Here's your historical fact of the day. In many log cabin traditions, especially in the Appalachian frontier, builders didn't use any nails at all. The entire structure was held together with notch joints and sometimes wooden pegs. Metal was scarce, heavy, and expensive. Instead, wood was the universal material. Builders crafted dowels from hardwood and drove them through drilled holes to pin logs together, a process called trunnel work, short for tree nail. You're not quite there yet, but it's on the horizon. Your quirky twist? Some early mountain men carved symbols or initials into the ends of their wall logs, little runes, jokes, even nursehold prayers. Not for anyone else to see, but just for themselves. Maybe it was superstition, maybe boredom, maybe a way to mark time in a place where days blend together. There are surviving cabins where those marks are still visible, Centuries later, faded but still legible. Quiet graffiti from another life. And now for your scholarly squabble. Did mountain men work faster or slower than we think? Some historians argue that building a cabin took only a week or two if the builder was experienced and the weather held. Others insist that, given the isolation and lack of help, it likely took months, especially if the builder had to stop every few days to hunt, fish, or not die of frostbite. Since most of these guys weren't writing daily progress updates in quill pens, we're left to guess based on cabin size, climate, and the occasional recovered journal. You're inclined to believe it took a while. By late afternoon, you've reached a milestone. You can no longer see over the top of the walls while standing inside. The structure towers above your head, 4 logs high on every side. The wind is still cold, but now it whispers around the cabin instead of through it. You duck into the opening where your door will eventually go and stand in the centre. The walls block the worst of the wind. It's not warm yet, not by a long shot, but it's better. It feels like a place, a somewhere, that's something. The snow hasn't stopped, but it hasn't gotten worse. You'll take it. As twilight rolls in, you add one last log, this one especially gnarly, covered in old scars and knots, and drop it into the place with a loud clunk. You sit down on a stump that's pretending to be a chair and stare at what you've made. It's rough, crooked in places, no roof, no floor. But it's rising. It's real. You make a small fire, warm your hands, and eat what's left of your salted meat. Not exactly a victory feast, but there's something satisfying about eating next to the walls you built with your own sweat and cursing. You run your fingers over the notches in the corners, feeling the way the wood locks together. Each one is slightly different, like fingerprints. Like you left a little of yourself in every joint. Not just strength, but judgment, adaptation. The learning curve carved into wood. The stars show themselves again, slow and steady. The forest for once seems to respect your effort and keeps quiet. Tomorrow, more walls, but tonight, you've got shelter, sort of. And that's more than most have had out here. Morning hits different now that you've got partial walls, the wind still whistles, but it flows around you more than through you. Like the forest is finally acknowledging your right to exist. You're not just a huddled shape in the brush anymore. You're a person with a perimeter. You stretch inside the half-built frame of your cabin, breathing in the scent of sap, ash, and cold air that bites just a little less than it used to. Your back cracks like a gunshot. Welcome to another day of trying not to die under a falling log. Today it's all about the roof, or more accurately, the thing the roof will eventually sit on. The ridgepole and the gable walls. Without those, your cabin is just a sad box waiting for rain to ruin its hopes and dreams. But before you can get a roof over your head, you've got to get some height. That means lifting logs even higher than before, stacking the gables into triangles at either end, and praying that your balance is better than your judgment. The first challenge, physics. The walls are now taller than you. You can't just roll a log up and drop it into place anymore. You need leverage. You grab the same sapling tripod you rigged up earlier and reinforce it with extra lashings. Then you make a pulley from some rope and a carved wooden wheel. It's crude, creaky, some one good gust away from a complete disaster, but it holds, mostly. You wedge a long pole under one of the gable logs, using it like a crowbar to start the lift, then pull the rope as hard as your cold fingers will allow. The log rises slowly, swaying with alarming freedom as it descends. You guide it like a giant angry marionette, coaxing it between the gable ends. One wrong move, and this log could fall straight into the cabin, or directly onto your skull. Either would be a memorable way to become a footnote in someone else's journal, but you manage it, barely. The log settles into its notches, and the ridgepole, your horizontal spine that will support the roof, rests in place. You tie it down temporarily, just in case the wind decides to get cocky. You sit back on the wall's edge and look at it. Breath steaming. It doesn't seem like much, a long log spanning 2 gables, but that's the moment the cabin becomes a house. It's got bones now, a backbone, something to hang a roof from, and a little hope onto. Raising the gables is trickier. You have to stack logs higher and higher, cutting each one shorter to follow the angle of the roofline. You notch them just like before, but this time you're working on ladders made from tied together branches and sheer optimism. Every time you climb, the whole contraption shudders, like it's trying to guess your weight. You stop breathing when you're at the top, balancing a log, chisel in one hand, mallet in the other. It's all math and guesswork and balance, plus a few moments of sheer panic when a log almost slides right off its perch and into next Tuesday. As the gables rise, you begin to picture the roofline, You're going for a steep pitch, not just because it looks good, but because snow is coming, and you'd rather it slide off the roof than turn your home into a buckling igloo. Plus, steep roofs make better sleeping lofts, and you're already dreaming of a tucked-away corner up high where you can roll into a pile of furs and not worry about raccoons watching you sleep. You manage to get the gables to their peak, each one a proud little triangle perched on the cabin's ends. The space between them, above the ridgepole, now feels like the mouth of a cave waiting to be sealed. You're already thinking about rafters, thin, straight poles cut from saplings that will stretch from the gables to the ridgepole, forming the skeleton of your roof. That's tomorrow's fight. Today, you just want to get down without dying. You climb down slowly, hands aching, legs quivering. You've used every muscle you forgot you had. You sit on a stump and watch the wind push clouds across the sky, low and heavy with snow that's probably coming soon. You sip cold water from your canteen and chew on a piece of stale biscuit that might as well be a stone. Still you feel something, not happy, not proud exactly, but closer, like the finish line exists somewhere out there in the trees, and you might actually reach it. Now for your historical fact. Ridgepoles were often the hardest part of early log cabin builds, not just because of their size, but because they were dangerous to place. In many traditions, including among settlers and fur traders, raising the ridgepole was a ceremonial moment. Some even considered it the topping out of the structure, worthy of a cheer, a drink, or a blessing. Without it, you had no roof. With it, you had a promise. Quirky fact of the day. In some remote mountain cultures, there was a tradition of placing a small pine bough or branch atop the ridgepole once it was raised. Not just decoration, but a kind of thanks to the forest for loaning the tree. Others placed a carved face or totem, just in case something unseen needed to know you were building with respect. And tonight's scholarly debate: did mountain men borrow ridgepole techniques from indigenous peoples? It's hard to say. While many native dwellings didn't use ridgepoles in the same way, certain longhouses and shelters had similar support beams. Some historians argue that early white trappers adapted these methods after seeing how well they worked. Others insist ridgepoles were a purely European import, especially among men who had once been shipbuilders to timber framers. Like most things out here, the truth probably lies somewhere in the overlap, learned, shared, and improvised. By sunset, the cabin's silhouette looks different. The walls are no longer just rising, they're reaching. With the gables and ridgepole in place, your shelter is becoming a house in earnest. You're not just stacking logs anymore, you're shaping space, you're carving comfort out of chaos. You sit by the fire eating the last of your rabbit stew, more bones than meat honestly, and let the ache in your body settle into the quiet around you. The flames flicker against the walls, casting shadows that stretch and sway like the ghosts of the forest watching your progress. You think about how far you've come, you think about how far you still have to go, and then you hear it. Soft at first, then louder. Snow, falling again. Heavier now, thicker. You tilt your head back and let a few flakes land on your face. Cold, yes, but silent, peaceful. Tomorrow you build the roof, but tonight your walls are standing, your ridgepole is in play, and your cabin is almost something you can believe in. Snow overnight. A solid inch, maybe two, enough to blur the forest, soften the noise of your footsteps, and remind you, like a polite slap, that your roofless cabin is still more theory than shelter. You wake up in the not-quite indoor space, flakes drifting in through the open top and dusting your blankets like powdered sugar on misery. It's quiet in that way snow makes everything quiet, like the world's holding its breath, watching to see what you'll do next. The answer, of course, is you're going to build a roof, or freeze trying. You pull on your stiff boots, knock the snow off your shoulders, and shuffle over to the fire pit to get something hot going. It's one of those mornings where your fingers don't quite work, and the thought of swinging an axe feels like an elaborate joke the wilderness is playing on you. But you've got rafters to cut, poles to set, and let's be honest, no one else is going to do it for you. The first step is finding the right wood. Rafters can't be just any old logs. You need straight, lightweight saplings, maybe 3 or 4 inches thick, and long enough to span from the ridgepole down to the top of the wall. Too short and your roof will sag. Too crooked and the snow will laugh at your craftsmanship before collapsing the whole thing. You grab your axe and venture out beyond the cabin site, crunching through the snow as you scan the tree line for candidates. You spot a patch of young pines, thin, tall, and spaced just right. Perfect. You pick out a dozen or so, mutter an apology to the forest, and get to work. Chopping them down takes less time than yesterday's massive logs, but they're still awkward to carry, especially with snow clinging to every branch like nature's passive-aggressive confetti. You drag them back one by one, forming a tidy pile next to the cabin. Slow work, wet work, but you're getting faster, stronger, or just number. Hard to tell anymore. Next comes trimming. You strip each sapling of its branches and bark, smoothing it down with your draw knife until it's clean and ready to become part of your sky-blocking, snow-shedding miracle roof. You measure out equal lengths using your makeshift guide stick and start cutting the ends to fit against the ridgepole at an angle. You notch each one just enough to grip the ridge, then position the other end to rest against the wall logs. Installing the rafters is a balancing act. Literally. You climb onto the top course of logs, holding one rafter at a time like you're trying to arm wrestle a tree branch. You slot the upper end against the ridgepole, then ease the bottom into place along the wall. The angle has to be just right, steep enough for snow to slide off, not so steep that your roofing material falls with it. You secure each one with pegs driven into small auger holes you drill by hand. No screws, no nails, just stubborn wood gripping wood the old-fashioned way. After the first few rafters, your hands start to find a rhythm. Lift, align, wedge, peg. The creak of the green wood echoes through the clearing, a kind of music now, rough but steady. You space them close together, maybe 18 inches apart, to help support the roof load. It's overkill, but you don't trust the snow not to dump 6 feet on you overnight out of spite. As the ridge begins to fill out with rafters, the structure takes on a new shape. It's no longer just 4 walls, it has lines, slopes, direct direction. It points upward. It dares to exist. The angled lines of the rafters catch the low afternoon light, and for a brief second, the cabin looks elegant, like it belongs here, nestled among the pines, rising from the frostbitten dirt like it's always been part of this landscape. You take a moment to sit and admire it. You've built a skeleton out of forest and willpower, a frame to hold back the sky. You're not done, far from it, but this is the turning point. Once the roof goes on, you stop surviving and start living. Now here's your historical fact. Many frontier builders used bark slabs, thatch, or even sod for roofing depending on the region. But in the mountains, where trees were plentiful and grass roofs were just bare trampolines waiting to happen, split shakes were common. Thin wooden shingles made by hand using a froe and mallet. It was slow, grueling work, but the results lasted years, sometimes decades. You're not splitting shakes just yet, but it's on the horizon. Quirky twist? Some early cabins were built with no roof at all at first, just a canvas tarp or a pile of branches to get through the first night or week. There are stories of trappers curling up under their half-finished homes, cooking beans in the snow while the rafters framed the stars. Romantic if you like frostbite. And for tonight's scholarly bickering, did mountain men really care about roof angles, or did they just eyeball it and hope for the best? Some say they brought knowledge from Europe or Eastern settlements, rough measurements and pitch ratios passed down by word of mouth. Others argue that in the mountains it was pure improvisation. See what works, learn from what collapses, build better next year. No blueprints, just instincts and muscle memory. You work until the light fades into that soft blue shadow that creeps in right before darkness. The rafters are up, at least enough to hold a roof. Tomorrow you'll start covering them, but tonight you sit under your angled skeleton and look up at the sky through the open frame. Snow still falls, slower now, drifting through the beams like ash from a long-dead fire. You build a small blaze inside the cabin, near what will someday be your hearth, and let the warmth chase the chill from your bones. The shadows of the rafters stretch across the snowy ground, crossing like ribs over the flickering light. You eat indians, just hard bread softened in broth, and think about how many nights you've slept under open air. Too many. But this might be the last. The roof is coming. The cabin is almost ready to close its eyes to the cold. You lie back on your blanket, staring up through the beams, and smile. The stars peek through, but not for long. Soon this view will be hidden behind pine shakes and smoke, and honestly, you're okay with that. The next morning is colder, not by a lot, but enough that you notice the difference in your fingers when you try to lace your boots. They don't quite work the way fingers should. You slap them against your thighs, breathe hot air into your palms, and accept that you've officially reached the stage of the build where winter is no longer gently hinting at its presence. It's banging on the door with both fists, and your door isn't built yet. But first, you need one. Until now, your cabin's been open to the world. A rectangular space with rising walls and an exposed skeleton of rafters, like a ship halfway through construction. But without a door, you're not sealing anything off. The wind just strolls in like it owns the place, tossing leaves across the dirt floor and reminding you that privacy and warmth are luxuries you still haven't earned. So today you decide to change that. Building a door starts with one magical, terrifying act: cutting a hole in your wall. You spend a good 20 minutes pacing the front face of the cabin, holding a stick against the logs, pretending it's a measuring tape. You want the door to face east so it'll catch the morning light, and hopefully not the brunt of the winter wind, which seems to come from the north with a personal vendetta. Once you've picked your spot, you mark the outline of your future doorway with charcoal, squint at it, then redraw it slightly taller. You've already banged your head on too many low branches this week. The actual cutting is a nightmare. Unlike frame houses with gaps for doors and windows built in, a log cabin door is an afterthought. That means taking a saw, chisel, and your patience, and carving through already stacked logs. You start by boring holes into the corners of the outline using your auger. Then you take your hand saw and slowly, so slowly begin cutting down between the logs, following the lines like a surgeon who forgot to go to medical school. The saw jams, the blade slips. You sweat, grunt, and invent entirely new words to express your emotions. One log gives up easily. The next seems to actively resist you, its grain twisting like it's trying to dodge the blade. Hours pass. At one point, you almost convince yourself you don't need a door. Maybe I'll just drape a bearskin across the opening, you mutter aloud. The forest doesn't answer, but a raven caws from a tree like it knows how stupid that sounds. Finally, after what feels like half your life and most of your body weight, a section of the wall collapses inward with a satisfying thud. You step back panting, sweat are dripping down your neck, and look through your new doorway. It's rough, jagged, asymmetrical in a way that makes your eye twitch. But it's there. You've created an entrance, which also means you've created an exit, a choice. You can now step into something instead of just around it. Feels monumental. But a hole isn't a door. Time to make one. You gather a few of the leftover planks you rived from those saplings you cut for rafters. Thinner slabs you split lengthwise using your froe and a heavy mallet. It's slow work, splitting them clean down the middle, but these boards will be your door's skin. You line them up on the ground, fitting them edge to edge like a wooden jigsaw puzzle. Then lay 2 cross pieces across the back and peg everything together with wooden dowels. You add a diagonal brace just for good measure, because sagging doors are a gateway to madness. The door is heavier than it looks, rough and rustic in the way all things are out here. You fashion leather hinges from an old strap nailed into the wood with bent iron tacks you salvaged from your gear bag. Not perfect, but they'll do. You hang the door with great ceremony, mostly because it takes all your strength to get it on the pegs, and step back to admire the effect. It's crooked, it creaks, it sticks at the bottom, but it closes. You push it shut and feel a rush of satisfaction as it thuds into the place, sealing off the outside world, if only a little. Historical fact for the night. Many early mountain cabins didn't have real doors at first. Builders would use animal hides, woven mats, or even thick blankets until they had the time, or those tools, to craft a wooden door. Hinges were often made from rawhide, braided leather, or wooden pins. Metal hinges were precious, often salvaged from wagons or traded for at distant posts. A door wasn't just an entrance, it was a symbol. It meant permanence. That you weren't just camping anymore, you were staying. Quirky twist? Some trappers carved small symbols or initials into the inside of their cabin doors, partly for luck, partly to remind them which way was in after a long night in the woods or one too many sips of squirrel whiskey. Others affixed charms, rabbit feet, bird skulls, or odd scraps of metal, believing it would keep evil spirits or nosy neighbours away. There are reports of a man who hung a small mirror on the back of his door to scare away bad luck with its own face. 10 out of 10 for creativity at least. Now for the scholarly side-eye. There's some debate over whether cabin doors always faced east, as many modern replicas suggest. Some historians claim this was more symbolic than practical, a kind of spiritual alignment with the rising sun. Others argue that direction was dictated by wind, slope, or visibility. After all, it's not much good at greeting the sunrise if you also get blasted with snow every morning. You sit just inside the threshold as night settles in, back against your newly closed door. You strike flint and steel, coax a fire to life, and feel the difference already. The wind presses at the walls but doesn't sneak through like it used to. There's resistance now, boundary. You've still got a hole in the ceiling, sure, but this door is a psychological win. It means this place belongs to you. You step outside, you're leaving something. You come back in, you're home, at least in the loose wilderness definition of the word. You lean against the rough grain, feel the creak in the hinges as the wind nudges the wood, and smile. Tomorrow may be windows, or maybe you'll finally tackle the hearth before your toes turn black. Either way, tonight, you sleep with a wall at your back, a fire in your cabin, and a door between you and the wild. And that, my friend, is real progress. You wake up in darkness, not because the sun isn't up yet, but because for the first time the cabin's actually holding out the light. The door you built yesterday creaks slightly in its frame, barely cracked open, letting in a sliver of grey dawn. You lie there for a second, blinking at the ceilingless sky and feeling the strange sensation of enclosure. It's not perfect, not warm, and definitely not insulated, but it's enough to fool your survival instincts into quieting down for once. Still, as cozy as your new doorway makes you feel, there's no denying the truth. Your cabin is a box. A sturdy, protective, hopefully weather-resistant box, but a dark one. The logs are thick, the door heavy, and with no windows, the inside has started to feel like a bear den. You'd keep warm in here, sure, but you'd also start to go slowly, quietly nuts in the dark. So, like it or not, it's window time. You pull yourself out of your bedroll, yank on your boots, and start pacing the interior. You've already noticed how the light filters in through the gaps in the rafters. But you need something more permanent, more intentional. You decide to cut just one window, at least for now. Keep it small, less heat loss, less structural risk, fewer things for wolves to crawl through. Just enough to let in daylight and give you a way to see who or what is out there. You choose the south wall, more sun in winter, less wind exposure. Smart, right? You mark off a rectangle about 2 feet wide and maybe 1.5 feet tall, nothing grand, no glass, just a hole you can close with a shutter when the weather turns mean. Cutting through the logs again is brutal. This time, though, you know what you're in for. You bore the corners with your auger, then take your saw and carve slowly, teeth grinding through the seasoned wood. It takes hours. You stop and stretch halfway through. The sawdust piles up at your feet, warm and fragrant, and you catch yourself thinking, this is going to be worth it. You're not sure if that's optimism or denial, but you keep sawing. Eventually, the center log chunk pops free, and for the first time, sunlight pours through a square of open air into the cabin. You step back, squinting, surprised at how much of a difference it makes. The light hits the opposite wall like a spotlight. Dust floats in the beam, dancing silently. You didn't realize how dark it had become inside until now. It's like someone opened your brain and let in fresh thought. Next step, the shutter. You grab some of the leftover plank scraps from the door project and start trimming them down to size. You fasten them together with 2 cross pieces and a diagonal brace, same as before. This one's lighter, easier to handle. You carve out 2 small slots in the logs to fit wooden pegs, creating simple pivot hinges so the shutter can swing open from the inside. Crude, but effective. You even carve a notch so you can wedge it closed with a stick if the wind gets nasty. With the shutter installed, you test it a few times. Open, close, it works. The sound of it slapping softly against the log frame is weirdly satisfying. You sit down on your log stool, staring through your new window. The forest is out there, swaying gently in the breeze. You watch a squirrel dart across a snow-dusted branch, then disappear into the underbrush like a tiny thief on a mission. For the first time, you can be inside and still see out. It feels good. Necessary. But not everyone built windows. Here's your historical fact. Early mountain cabins often skipped windows entirely. Glass was expensive, fragile, and useless to a man living 200 miles from the nearest supply wagon. Instead, builders used shutters made from wood, oiled paper, or thin animal hide stretched tight to let light through while keeping out wind and bugs. Some used mica, thin sheets of mineral that could be found in the mountains, and served as sort of prehistoric plexiglass. Durable, translucent, and just fragile enough to make you feel fancy. Your quirky twist for today: some trappers built their cabins with hidden shutters, basically secret peepholes or swing-out wooden panels so they could spot intruders without opening the door. These weren't just for animals. When you lived in disputed territory, the line between neighbor and threat was blurry. Imagine sipping pine needle tea by your fire, then sliding open a tiny panel to check whether the movement outside is a deer or someone trying to borrow your rifle by force. And now for the scholarly debate. Were windows a sign of long-term commitment to a site, or just a luxury? Some argue that adding a window meant you planned to stay, season after season, maybe even raise a family. Others say even temporary cabins sometimes had windows for sheer practicality. The line between a temporary outpost and home wasn't always clear-cut. You built what you needed, and if what you needed was sunlight, you made a hole in the wall and figured the rest out later. By mid-afternoon, the sun has shifted just enough to stream directly through your window and across the interior. It changes everything. The space feels less like a box and more like a room. Your eyes can rest now, no longer adjusting to the gloom. Even your mood lifts, just a little. You don't realize how much constant darkness eats at your nerves until you let the light back in. You spend the rest of the afternoon tidying, moving your gear, arranging firewood by the door, shifting your tools to hang on wooden pegs you carved into the walls. Little touches that make the place feel lived in. You sit again by the window and eat a hard biscuit smeared with what might have once been apple jam. And even though the meal is pitiful, the view somehow makes it better. Snow drifts from the branches, the sky blushes pink as the sun dips behind the pines. That evening you light a small fire in the hearth pit, still just a stone ring on the ground, and sit with your back to the door, your face toward the window. You've never noticed how firelight and twilight can blend just for a moment, making it feel like your cabin is connected to the outside instead of walled off from it. That window might be small, but it's the one part of this place that breathes. You shut the shutter as night falls, wedge the stick into place and stretch out on your bedroll. The cabin creaks softly around you, settling with the cold. The air is still, the wind muffled, and for once the dark doesn't press quite so hard. You close your eyes knowing that when you wake, the light will find you. By now you've noticed something interesting about fire. When it works, it's magic. Warmth, light, a flickering guardian against the dark. When it doesn't, it's smoke in your eyes, soot in your lungs, and a slowly creeping reminder that your survival hinges on the difference between a campfire and a chimney. And this morning your cabin smells like regret and burnt pine needles. You roll over, coughing, eyes watering, and realize your fire's gone sideways in the night. Not dangerously, but just stupidly. The smoke didn't rise, it curled, it lingered. It turned your peaceful wooden haven into the world's most rustic smokehouse, with you as the meat. You grope your way to the shutter, crack it open, and let the cold morning air flood in. Instantly it clears out most of the haze, and about all of the warmth. You sit up wrapped in your blanket, and stare at your barely there hearth. It's just a circle of stones really, more ceremonial than functional. You need something better. Something that can pull smoke upward, not just swirl it around your head like a curse. It's chimney day. Building a chimney in the middle of nowhere with no bricks, no mortar, and only a passing understanding of airflow is a challenge that starts with optimism and ends with a face full of soot. You start by scouting for flat stones, broad thin ones you can stack like cards. Luckily the nearby creek bed has just enough loose rocks to get started. You haul them back, arms aching, stacking them in a pile next to your cabin like a medieval mason with a muscle deficiency. Next, you need a place for the chimney to live. You pick the north wall, furthest from the door and right where your future fireplace will sit. You clear out your old fire ring and dig a shallow pit against the wall, then start laying the base stones, fitting them together like an uneven puzzle. You wedge smaller rocks between them for stability and fill gaps with mud mixed with pine needles and moss, a frontier version of mortar that smells better than it works. Layer by layer, you build the chimney up along the wall, carefully angling it so the smoke has a path up and out. Every few rows, you stop to test the draw, lighting a tiny fire in the hearth and watching which way the smoke flows. At first, it rolls back into your face. Then slowly, with each adjustment, it starts to pull upward, climbing through the chimney's throat like it finally understands the assignment. You frame the opening inside the cabin with split logs, scorched black at the ends from past fires, and wedge stones into the corners to reinforce the edges. It's not a fireplace like you'd find in a country inn. It's rugged, uneven, a little wobbly, but it draws, and that's everything. The finishing touch is the chimney's crown, the topmost layer, poking above the cabin's edge like a flagpole made of rocks and soot. You stack a few flat stones into a crude cap, leaving enough space for airflow but blocking snow and rain from dumping down into your living room. You step back to admire it, face streaked with immersive mud, hands stiff and blackened, and feel victorious. You built a chimney out of dirt and boulders. You half expect it to collapse out of spite, but it doesn't. Historical fact for the night: most frontier cabins didn't have brick chimneys, not unless they were close to a town or clay deposits. Instead, early trappers and settlers used cat and clay chimneys, a woven frame of sticks packed with mud and clay that hardened over time. It worked, sort of, until it dried out too much and caught fire. Others used dry stone like you just did, relying on careful stacking and a prayer. Chimneys were often the last thing added, because they were the most likely to fail. Your quirky twist? Some mountain men believed the smoke carried messages, or even souls, so a well-built chimney wasn't just about heat, it was about respect. One superstition held that if the smoke curled back into the room instead of rising out cleanly, it meant something unwelcome had entered your home. Superstition, sure, but try sleeping soundly with smoke creeping along your rafters and tell me your brain doesn't start imagining ghosts. Now here's the scholarly debate. Did early chimneys really improve air quality, or did they just move the problem higher? Some argue that without insulation, most of the heat escaped straight out the chimney, making the cabin warmer only in a 6-inch radius around the fire. Others say even a poor chimney dramatically improved survival, less smoke inhalation, less eye strain, and fewer surprise sparks leaping onto your blanket. The truth is, even a badly made chimney was better than none, and that's the standard out here, better than nothing. You take your first real test drive just before dusk. You stack some split wood in the hearth, scraps of pine and dry branches, and strike a spark with your flint. The fire catches, dances and grows. For a long minute you hold your breath watching, the smoke rising. It rises, straight up through the stones out the chimney's mouth. You hear the faintest whistle as the air draws upward, carrying the smoke with it, and your whole body sags with relief. The warmth follows, not just from the fire itself, but from knowing it'll stay here. You won't wake up coughing, choking on half-burnt pine. You might finally be able to dry your clothes without fumigating them. You sit by the hearth, legs stretched out, watching the flames lick the stone. The glow flickers on the log walls, bouncing light into corners that haven't seen it before. Outside, snow drifts down again, gentle and lazy. You pull your blanket tighter, lean back against the wall and just breathe. The fire crackles. The cabin creaks a little, settling into the cold. You stare into the flames and feel something new curling in your chest, something just barely recognizable. Comfort. Not much, but a spark of it. You fall asleep that night, warm, dry, and smelling faintly of smoke and pine, and for once it doesn't feel like a warning. It's amazing what one night of real warmth will do to your brain. You wake up the next morning actually feeling human, like a person with a purpose and not just a half-frozen sack of bones hoping to not die in his sleep. The chimney held, the fire drew clean, and for the first time since you staked your claim in the woods, you slept through the night without coughing up half a lung. Of course, your back still feels like you spent the night wrestling a bear on a bed of gravel, but hey, progress. And with warmth comes ambition. Today, you're turning your cabin from a shelter into a home. You need furniture. Not a lot, this isn't a catalogue shoot, but enough to keep you off the cold ground and away from the creepy crawlies that seem to multiply by the hour. You're starting with the 3 basics: a bed, a stool, and a table. It's the frontier version of interior design. Rustic chic meets, please don't let me sit on another stump. You begin with the bed. Right now you're sleeping on a pile of pine boughs and wool, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. What you want is a raised platform, a place for furs, blankets, maybe even a dream or two. You scout through your leftover log pile and find 4 relatively straight limbs, about 4 feet long and 4 shorter pieces for legs. You cut simple mortises, square notches, in the corners and wedge the legs in tightly, then lash them with rawhide for added strength. The frame goes up with a satisfying creak. It's not high off the ground, just enough to keep you away from the cold dirt and the occasional scuttling bug, but it already feels like royalty. For the mattress, you layer it with pine boughs, dried grass and folded wool blankets. It's rough, but the scent of the pine and the feeling of being off the ground make up for it. You lie on it for a second just to test. It dips a little in the middle. Okay, a lot. Still, it beats waking up with a beetle in your ear. Next, the stool. You need somewhere to sit other than your bed or a damp rock. You find a thick, squat log about knee height and cut it flat on both ends. It already looks like a seat, just waiting for someone with more ambition than carpentry skills. You smooth the surface with your draw knife, then carve 3 shallow holes underneath for legs. You cut 3 angled sticks, whittle their ends to pegs, and pound them into the holes. It wobbles, of course, every handmade stool does, but after a little adjusting it holds. You sit on it and feel a brief, almost ridiculous swell of pride. A seat. An actual place to sit and eat. Or think, sorry. Or just stare at the fire without leaning on your knees like a sad poet. Finally, the table, or something table adjacent. You find a wide plank you split last week, more like a slab really, and 2 forked branches for legs. You notch the underside of the plank and fit it onto the legs like a giant flat spoon resting on a wooden cradle. It's uneven, it tilts slightly to one side, and you're 95% sure a raccoon could topple it with enough motivation. But it works. You can place your gear on it, eat on it, sharpen tools on it. It transforms the space from a survival shelter into a place you could imagine spending the long, dark days of winter. As you build, your cabin starts to feel different. The act of placing things inside, furniture, tools, routines, changes its energy. You're not just visiting anymore, you're settling. The walls feel less like barriers and more like arms drawn close around you. A nest, rough-edged and smoky. But yours. Historical fact for the day. Most early frontier furniture was built on site, often with 0 nails and barely any tools. Peg and hole joints, lashings and wedge fittings were the norm. Settlers and mountain men alike relied on what they had: green wood, leftover logs and creativity. Beds were often nothing more than stretched hides on 4 poles. Tables were slabs balanced on stumps. And stools, they doubled as chopping blocks, nightstands, or sometimes even firewood if things got desperate. Quirky twist? Some mountain men carved faces into their stools or bedposts, not artistic masterpieces, just crude little visages with hollow eyes and grim grins, maybe for luck, maybe for company. When you're alone in the woods long enough, even a smiling piece of pine can feel like a friend. There's one famous account of a trapper who named every piece of furniture in his cabin and said goodnight to them like roommates. Goodnight table, goodnight chair, goodnight Henry the bed. He made it through 3 winters, can't argue with results. And now for your scholarly debate. Did mountain men actually care about comfort? Or was furniture just a byproduct of boredom? Some argue that any effort beyond basic survival, like carving a decorative bed or smoothing a tabletop, meant a man planned to stay put. Others claim it was just something to do between hunts, a way to kill time when the snow made travel impossible. Comfort may have been accidental, not intentional. Then again, even the toughest men eventually get tired of sitting on rocks. By late afternoon, your cabin interior looks wildly different. No longer just dirt and shadows. There's a bed in the corner, a stool by the fire, and a lopsided table that catches the light through the small window just so. You sit on the stool, lean forward on your elbows, and just breathe. The fire crackles softly, the wind bumps against the shutter like a curious animal, and your back thanks you for not sitting on another cold log. You eat a modest dinner, smoked meat, a bit of hard cheese and water from the creek, and it feels like a feast. Not because the food's any better, but because you're eating it at a table, on a seat beside a fire, inside a place you built. That feeling? It's quiet. Not joyful exactly, but as steady. It settles in your bones like warmth after a long walk in the snow. Night comes early again. You check the shutter, bank the fire, and crawl into your raised bed. The pine boughs creak under your weight, and the scent is sharp, clean, grounding. The rafters above are still bare, but somehow the cabin feels smaller in a good way. Less like the world could slip in and more like you've carved out a little slice of peace. And before you fall asleep, you mutter softly to the room, barely loud enough for the logs to hear. Good night, Henry the bed. You wake up to silence. Not peaceful silence. Ominous silence. That thick, weighty kind of hush that settles over the forest right before something terrible happens. You lie still for a second, ears straining. But there's no wind, no birds, no scurrying of mice in the rafters. Just stillness. Heavy, white stillness. Then you sit up, pull open the shutter, and yep, there it is. Snow. Real snow this time. Not a dusting, not a polite little warning, but a full-on, knee-deep, mood-destroying carpet of cold that stretches across the clearing and coats every surface like winter's finally cashing in its chips. The sky is still thick with it too, spitting flurries that spiral downward like a blizzard trying to pace itself. You don't say anything, just exhale long and slow and close the shutter again. Because you knew this was coming. You knew it the moment you cut the first log, and now it's here. Winter has arrived, unapologetic, heavy-footed and unamused by your progress. So what now? Now you winterproof. First step, seal the cracks. You walk around the inside of the cabin, inspecting the walls with fresh urgency. Every tiny space between logs is now a potential draft tunnel. A cold air express lane pointed directly at your spine. You thought you did a decent job chinking the gaps as you built, but now you're noticing hairline seams, places where the logs don't sit as snug as they should, where wind could slip through like a knife between ribs. You gather your chinking materials, mud, moss, strips of bark, and whatever else you can find not buried under 2 feet of snow. It's wet work, cold work. You pack the mix into every crack and press it in with your fingers until it feels like sealing up the cabin with your bare hands. You smear the mixture into seams like icing on a terrible cake, ignoring how the mud seeps into your gloves and numbs your fingertips. The window gets extra attention. You wedge bark strips around the shutter frame, add a few furs to the inside to act as a curtain, and suddenly the cabin's interior feels quieter, tighter. It's not warm exactly, but the edges aren't bleeding cold anymore. Next comes the door. The bottom still has a draft. You grab some leftover wool scraps, roll them tight, and jam them along the threshold. Then you hang a blanket across the inside of the door on a peg stick, so even when it's closed, you've got a second line of defense. It hangs awkwardly, and smells vaguely of old socks, but it does the job. Then it's time to think about firewood. You've got a pile outside covered in a makeshift tarp of stitched together hides, but it won't last. Not in this weather. You start bringing it inside, load after load stacked neatly against the wall by the hearth. You fill the corner until it looks like a miniature lumberyard, then stack kindling in bundles, tying it with twine you twisted from green bark weeks ago. It feels good, secure, like stockpiling comfort. You glance at your chimney and say a silent prayer to the gods of smoke and draught. Then you light the fire. It catches quick, burning hot now that the hearth's had time to dry and settle. The flames throw heat across the room, bouncing off the log walls and into the corners. You move your stool closer and warm your hands, feeling the bite of the day finally start to fade. Then you remember the roof. It's still just rafters, just bones. You haven't shingled it yet. And now, snow's creeping in between the beams like a thief in the night. You throw on your coat, stomp outside, and assess the damage. Snow has begun to pile in the centre, falling through the open roof onto your floor like your cabin is a novelty snow globe and someone gave it a good shake. You knew this was a problem. You just didn't expect the problem to show up this fast. So you improvise. You haul out your oilcloth tarp, previously your sleeping ground sheet, and stretch it across the rafters as for a temporary roof. You tack it down with sharpened sticks and wedge snow around the edges to seal the wind out. It's a stopgap measure, but for now, it'll buy you time. Time to finish the real roof before the weather gets even worse. Because this is just the beginning. Historical fact for the day. Frontier cabins were often built with winter into mind, even if they didn't finish everything before the snow hit. Early trappers used chinking materials like clay, moss, and even dried dung to seal gaps, and while their roofs were covered with hand-split shakes, wooden shingles cleaved from logs with a froe and mallet. Some cabins didn't even have full roofs until midwinter. They just layered branches, hides or bark to survive the first few storms. Quirky twist? Some trappers believed that a well-chinked cabin could hold in spirits, good or bad. One superstition warned against sealing all the cracks in a cabin, claiming that you needed at least one small gap to let the soul breathe. Otherwise, the cabin might trap more than just heat. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, it's enough to make you hesitate before sealing the very last seam. And here's the scholarly debate. Did mountain men really prepare for winter, or did most just wing it and hope for the best? Some accounts suggest intense preparation, weeks of cutting wood, drying meat, sewing furs, and sealing cabins. Others tell stories of men scrambling to finish shelters while the snow was already falling, working by torchlight with frozen fingers and half-built roofs. Either way, winter came when it wanted, and the prepared fared only slightly better than the desperate. You work into the afternoon, fingers numb, breath steaming. You double-check the door, the shutter, the tarp roof. You stuff the last cracks with moss and mutter to yourself about thermal efficiency like you're some kind of wilderness architect. Finally, you step inside, shake off the snow and shut the door behind you. It closes with a dull thud, muffling the storm outside. Inside it's warm, dim, the fire glows, the stew pot simmers, and the peeling wind howls somewhere far away. You sit on your stool, pull your blanket around your shoulders, and listen to the storm slam against the walls you built. It doesn't get in. Not today. You lean back and smile. You've made it to winter. Now all you have to do is survive it. By the time the storm finally lets up, the world outside your cabin has changed. The clearing is buried under nearly 3 feet of snow, so pristine it almost looks fake. Trees sag under the weight of it, boughs bending like old men with too many regrets. The trail you made weeks ago, the one that led from the creek to your firewood pile, has vanished completely. It's just white now. White in every direction. You crack open the door and step into it carefully, boots sinking deep into the silence, and your first thought is not about beauty or danger, it's about food. You're hungry. Not the polite kind of hungry where you open the fridge and stare into it like it's supposed to inspire you. No, this is the deeper, colder, wolfier hunger, the kind that reminds you your body is an engine and winter is cruel to engines without fuel, and the truth is, your rations are thinning. What meat you dried earlier in the fall is nearly gone, and you're down to the last heel of a bannock loaf so hard you could use it to hammer pegs. So today's mission, Mountain Man Meal Prep, also known as figure out how to eat before your stomach stages a rebellion. You start by checking your traps. You've got a handful set near the creek and a few in the thickets beyond the cabin. Snowshoe prints dot the fresh powder, and you follow them with a quiet hope that's maybe a little desperate. The traps are simple, snares made from braided sinew and twitch-up deadfalls, but you've had luck before. Today, you find a rabbit in one of the snares, stiff with the cold, already half covered in snow. You crouch down, lift it from the loop, and say a quick thanks. Not poetic, just the muttered kind of gratitude you give to the universe when it agrees to feed you. You clean it back at the cabin, quick and clean, saving the hide to dry later. The meat's lean, but there's enough for a stew, and you toss the bones into the pot too for flavour. Into the kettle goes everything. Meat, water, a handful of dried root you dug up weeks ago and forgot about, and the last chunk of salt the size of your thumbnail. You hang the kettle from a metal hook you wedged between 2 stones in the hearth and sit back as the fire brings it to a simmer. The smell rises slow, earthy, meaty, comforting in that wild way that makes your shoulders drop an inch just smelling it. You poke the fire, adjust the pot, and for the first time in days, you anticipate the next meal instead of just tolerate it. While it simmers, you decide to make bannock. It's the simplest of breads, just flour, water, and a bit of fat if you're lucky, but it fills the belly and lifts the spirit, at least a little. You mix the last of your flour with water in a carved wooden bowl. Stir it into a dough and pat it flat into a disc. You set it on a hot rock beside the fire and watch it puff slightly, the surface blistering with heat. It smells like survival, like a frontier breakfast, like something you'd remember later, when your fingers aren't frozen and your firewood pile isn't shrinking by the hour. You eat slowly when it's done. Rabbit stew, rich and hot, with the bannock to mop up the broth. It's not a feast, but it's real food. It warms you from the inside out, and you lean back afterward, feeling something close to full for the first time in what feels like weeks. You scrape every last bit from the bowl and lick your fingers, because out here, nothing gets wasted, not time, not effort, and certainly not stew. Historical fact of the day, mountain men often survive the winter on a diet that modern folks would call barely edible. Dried meat, usually bison or venison, bannock, pemmican, a dense paste made from fat, dried meat and berries, and whatever they could trap or shoot on short notice. Vegetables were rare. Salt was treasure. Coffee? Only if you'd traded for it or hoarded it like gold. Some trappers kept a pouch of roasted chicory root as a substitute. Bitter, earthy, and just enough to trick the tongue into thinking you were civilized. Quirky twist. There are reports of mountain men cooking porcupine, beaver tail, and even the occasional pine squirrel. Not for flavour, those options tasted like bark and remorse, but because in deep winter you didn't get to be picky. One old trapper claimed roast squirrel fat on a stick was a delicacy provided you didn't mind the fur. There's even an account of someone baking acorn bread, though calling it bread might be generous, more like a sad, bitter brick of survival. Now for the scholarly debate. Did mountain men plan their winter food supply, or just wing it and hope they could hunt enough along the way? Some historians say trappers stockpiled all autumn, drying meat and storing fat in animal bladders like makeshift Tupperware. Others argue many of them just moved constantly, following game trails and trusting their rifles more than their root cellars. Some cabins show signs of food storage pits and dugout caches, while others suggest a lifestyle of near-constant foraging. As always, probably depended on the man and just how many winters he'd already survived. Later that day, you clean your bowl and sharpen your knife, then hang the rabbit pelt to dry on a peg near the hearth. The light from your little window catches it just right, and for a second the cabin feels stable, not fancy, not finished, but like something that might actually hold. You add a few more logs to the fire, check the draft of the chimney, and sit down to plan your next move. Because winter isn't just about staying warm, it's about staying fed. The next snowstorm could last for days. The animals could disappear deeper into the woods. Your traps might come up empty. So you make a list in your head, more firewood, more snares. Maybe try to catch fish under the ice if you can find a way to not freeze doing it. You might even try making pemmican if you can scrape together enough fat. The light fades early again, and you bank the fire high. You crawl into your bed, belly warm, hands clean, and for the first time in a long while, not feeling the gnaw of hunger as you close your eyes. You sleep with the satisfaction of someone who caught their own dinner and turned it into something vaguely edible, which, in the wilderness, is as close to a gourmet meal as it gets. You wake to a sound you never thought you'd miss, dripping, soft, rhythmic, faintly musical. Water falling from the eaves, tapping against the hard-packed snow outside. You crack open the door and blink into a morning that looks more like early spring than deep winter. The sky is soft grey, the air strangely warm, and the trees are shedding their snowcoats in big lazy chunks. It's a thaw, a rare, fleeting gift, and you know exactly what that means. Time to deal with water. The irony isn't lost on you. You've spent the last month praying for heat, hoarding firewood, building walls and fires and blankets between yourself and the cold. And now that warmth has arrived, it brings its own set of problems, mainly where all that melting snow is going to go. The short answer? Downhill. The long answer? Into your cabin, if you're not careful. You step out and walk the perimeter. The ground is slushy under your boots, the snow receding in puddles, revealing patches of brown earth and trampled pine needles. It's messy. It's beautiful. It's dangerous. If your cabin isn't set up for runoff, water will pool along the foundation, seep under your walls, and turn your hard-earned floor into a soggy sponge. First, you grab your shovel and start digging shallow trenches. Nothing fancy, just narrow ditches angled away from the cabin to divert the water flow. You shape them like little rivers, circling the higher ground and guiding the melt toward a natural dip near the trees. It's exhausting work, churning wet, half-frozen soil, but the payoff is immediate. You watch the water change course, gurgling through your makeshift canal system like it respects your authority. Then you check inside. The floor's mostly dry, but the corner near the door is damp. Not flooded, not swampy, just threatening. You wedge a few flat stones under the sill and stuff more moss into the gap below the threshold. You rake the dirt floor smooth and add another layer of pine boughs for insulation. It's a temporary fix, but everything out here is temporary, even the weather. And speaking of water, drinking water. The creek is running high again, its surface no longer frozen solid, and for a moment you feel a ridiculous wave of joy at the thought of fresh, moving water. You grab your metal kettle and make your way down the slippery slope, boots crunching on slush, your breath visible in the air, but lighter than it's been in weeks. You fill the kettle at the creek's edge and watch as the current tugs at the surface alive again. You take a long, slow sip from your canteen and swear you can taste the difference. Cold, mineral-rich, sharp like melted stone. Water in the woods isn't just hydration, it's company. A voice, a source, and today, it's talking. Back at the cabin, you heat the water to purify it. Boil off whatever upstream critter may have left a gift behind. The steam curls from the kettle, filling the room with a damp, clean warmth that feels almost indulgent. You pour the hot water into your wooden bowl, dip a rag into it, and give yourself a hasty, awkward wash. It's not a bath, but it's enough to remind you what clean skin feels like, sort of. You even scrub your socks and hang them near the fire, marvelling at how quickly luxury has been redefined. Now, about sanitation. You've been managing it in the time-honoured, unglamorous way. Pick a spot in the woods, far from the water source, dig a hole, and don't look back. But you've learnt that with snow on the ground, waste freezes. With a thaw, it melts and moves fast. So today you pick a better location for your latrine. You dig a proper pit, build a crude seat from logs, and add a privacy screen made of woven branches. It's ugly, slightly wobbly, and probably an insult to every concept of hygiene ever invented. But it's yours. and it beats squatting behind the same tree every morning like a haunted raccoon. Historical fact for the day: mountain men and early trappers were surprisingly aware of the need for clean water and basic sanitation, at least the ones who didn't die of dysentery. Many built their cabins with water management in mind, choosing high ground and diverting runoff with ditches, just like you did today. Latrines were often located downhill from the cabin and well away from the water source, and yes, they understood the consequences of getting that wrong. Quirky twist? Some mountain men believed in spring divination, a superstition that said the way a creek thawed could predict your year. If the ice cracked loud and early, good luck. If it oozed out quietly like today, bad omens. There's even a tale about a man who moved his entire cabin uphill after watching the creek flow the wrong direction. Did it work? Who knows? He died of a falling tree, but his latrine stayed dry. And now for the scholarly debate. Did mountain men build systems for sanitation, or were they entirely reactive? Some suggest these men were methodical, planning their waste pits, building drainage, even installing crude gutters on their roofs using hollowed logs. Others argue it was pure improvisation, dig a hole and hope for the best territory. Archaeological evidence is slim, most latrines vanished with time, and personal journals rarely mentioned where or how people relieved themselves. Apparently, even in the wilderness, some things were too private to record. As the sun starts to dip again, you finish digging the last of your water channels and check your cabin for leaks. The tarp roof has held, but barely. It's sagging in the centre, collecting meltwater in a cold, miserable puddle. You climb up carefully, poke a hole in the lowest point, and watch the water gush out in a narrow stream, splattering into the snow below with a sound like laughter. It's fine. You'll fix the roof tomorrow. You step back into the cabin, boots soaked, gloves stiff, face red from cold, but inside it's warm, dry. The fire burns steady, the stew pot bubbles gently, and the floor, miraculously, is still intact. You take off your coat, hang it near the fire, and sit on your stool with a slow, satisfied grunt. Your cabin isn't perfect. It leaks, it groans, it smells faintly of damp fir and smouldering pine. But today, it didn't flood. You drank clean water, you stayed dry, you even scrubbed your feet. Out here, that's as close to civilization as you're going to get. You bank the fire for the night, check the window shutter one last time and crawl into your bed. Outside, the world is melting, shifting, rearranging itself. Inside, for now, you've got control, a fire, a roof, a plan. And no water on the floor. You're not alone out here, you never were, even when it felt like the whole world had shrunk down to you, your fire, and your war with gravity and snow. Something else was watching, listening. You hear them at night mostly. The scurry of tiny claws in the rafters, a soft rhythmic rustling under the floor, the occasional thump that's just loud enough to make you sit up and grip your knife. Welcome to the next stage of wilderness living, dealing with the roommates you didn't invite. This morning it starts with a missing bannock. You'd set it on the edge of your table to cool, now it's gone. You think maybe you just misplaced it, because who wants to believe you're being outsmarted by a rodent? But then you find the crumbs, a neat trail leading straight to the corner behind your firewood pile. You investigate with all the grace of a man crawling through splinters and splashed mud, and there it is, a hole, tiny, chewed, smug. You stare at it like it insulted your mother. Congratulations, you've got mice. It's inevitable, really. You built a warm structure filled with food scraps and soft bedding in the middle of a snow-covered wilderness. Of course something else would want in, mice, squirrels, maybe even a pine marten if you're particularly cursed. You make a mental note to watch your boots from now on. You're not trying to share them with anything that has teeth and a nesting instinct. First you set traps, old-fashioned, frontier style, a small board balanced on a stick baited with crumbs and tension. You've read about a method using a tin can, some string, and a pebble, but your engineering confidence is too fragile for that right now. You set a few along the base of the wall, another near the firewood, and one by the bed. Then you sit back and listen. It's quiet for hours. Then right around dusk, snap. You check and confirm. Mouse, tiny, grey, dead. You feel a brief pang of guilt, then remember the missing bannock. The chewed bedding, the twitchy little footprints across your table. War is war. Still, you're not heartless. You take the body outside, bury it beneath the snow, and offer a simple apology. Next time, knock. But the mice aren't your only visitors. That night, You hear something bigger, not in the cabin, outside, a soft snuffling sound like someone dragging a heavy sack through the snow. You go still, heart ticking louder than the fire, and slowly move to the shutter. You lift it just a crack and peer into the moonlit clearing. Eyes, low to the ground, pale, wide, reflecting the firelight. A fox. You exhale slowly. Not a predator, not a threat, just a four-legged thief on a scouting mission. The fox watches the cabin for a moment, then trots off into the trees, tail high and unconcerned. You smile, part admiration, part warning. You're not the only one out here making a living. By morning you find fresh tracks, fox, rabbit, maybe a weasel, and one that makes your stomach dip. Bear. Faint, old, half melted, but unmistakable. A big one. You tell yourself it's gone, tucked away in some deep den, dreaming of spring. You also sharpen your axe and reinforce the door latch, just in case dreams aren't enough. Historical fact of the day, mountain cabins were rarely critter-free. Mice, squirrels, and insects were constant companions, especially once food entered the picture. Early trappers tried to keep their supplies in sealed sacks tied from rafters or buried in dugouts beneath the cabin. Some cabins had raised floors with tight seams, others added metal sheeting around table legs to keep pests from climbing. But most just learned to live with the noise, until it started nibbling on their toes. Quirky twist? One famous frontiersman reportedly kept a squirrel as a pet. Said it was good luck, named it Whiskey, claimed it could predict weather changes based on how much it twitched. Another kept a raven that stole buttons and dropped them into the hearth, like it had a grudge against fashion. The line between vermin and companion was blurry, especially after a few weeks alone. Now for the scholarly debate. Were cabins more vulnerable to animals than open camps? Some argue cabins invited rodents and scavengers by offering warmth and shelter. Others suggest the structure kept them out so long as you maintained it. Journals from the period are split. Some men built elaborate food storage systems, others left meat hanging in the rafters and hoped for the best. One recurring theme? Everyone had mice. You spend the day sealing more gaps. Chinking isn't just for weather now, it's your first line of defense. You stuff pine needles and mud into corners, nail a scrap of rawhide over the mouse hole, and hang your food from the rafters in a bag tied tight and high. You also create a barrier around your bed using stacked firewood and a circle of ash. Mostly superstition, but when you're this deep into winter, superstition starts to feel like common sense. That night, you sit by the fire and listen. The crackle of burning sap, the whisper of wind against the cabin walls, a faint rustle in the rafters that you choose to believe is just the house settling. You eat your meal, bannock and thin stew, without interruption. No missing portions, no gnawed edges. The traps stay silent. The fox doesn't return. You fall asleep with your knife tucked under your pillow and one boot within reach, just in case something decides to nest in it. The wilderness doesn't stop at the walls. It leaks in, slips through cracks, hides under the bed, and sometimes just stares at you from the trees. You built a cabin, but the forest never really leaves you alone. It was only a matter of time before you started talking to inanimate objects. The first time it happens, you don't even notice. You're halfway through patching another log seam, your hand raw, your knees cold, when you pat the chinking in place and mutter, "There, that's better, isn't it?" The cabin doesn't respond, of course, but it feels like it listens. You pause, stare at the log, then shrug. Talking to the walls is better than talking to yourself, right? That logic doesn't hold up. Over the next few days, the cabin becomes less of a structure and more of a cast of characters. The stool, loyal but loud. The table, wobbly and unpredictable. The door always seems to stick at the worst possible moment, like it enjoys watching you struggle. Your axe has a name now. Margaret. Why Margaret? You don't know, but when Margaret cuts clean, you thank her. When she glances off a knot and nearly takes your shin, you scold her like a stubborn mule. You're not losing it. Not exactly. It's just that when the snow piles high and the wind sounds like a pack of wolves howling through a pipe organ, your brain looks for company wherever it can find it, even if that company is your own echo bouncing off the log walls. The isolation doesn't hit you all at once, it trickles in. You go a whole day without speaking out loud. Then two. Then on the third day, you catch yourself narrating your actions in a weird half-whisper, like you're hosting your own private survival show. Here we are, chopping, kindling. That's a nice split. Clean grain, good girl, Margaret. You laugh, out loud. It echoes, and you like it. Later, you sit at your table, alone, obviously, and hold a full-blown conversation with your soup. It doesn't say much, but you decide it's a good listener. When it bubbles, you pretend it's agreeing with you. You toast your tin cup to it and say to not freezing to death this week, then drink it like it's the finest brandy in the mountains. There's a certain peace in the madness, a rhythm. You wake, you stoke the fire, you check the traps, you eat her, you repair what needs fixing, and you watch the light change across the window. You used to miss clocks. Now you measure time by how long it takes the sun to cross your cabin floor. Noon, when the light hits your table. Dusk, when it disappears off the bedpost. But the solitude sharpens everything. Small sounds become symphonies. The crunch of snow under a distant animal's feet is enough to freeze your breath. The creak of the rafters makes your heart jump like something's climbing across the roof. You begin to interpret everything, the pitch of the wind, the way the trees sway, even how the fire crackles, as if the world is trying to tell you something in a language you're just beginning to understand. Historical fact, many mountain men went entire seasons, sometimes longer, without seeing another human face. Some by choice, others by circumstance. Trading posts could be weeks away, and winter made travel suicidal. Letters were rare. Books, if you had one, became sacred. Some men read the same page over and over until they could recite it from memory. Others carved stories into the walls or kept journals written in charcoal and grease. The silence didn't just shape them, it became part of them. Quirky twist, one trapper allegedly made puppets out of dried animal skins and held nightly council meetings to decide what to do the next day. Another named each of his tools and claimed they gave him advice. The rifle said wait, the knife said go. He survived 7 winters and died peacefully in his cabin. Alone, but surrounded by friends, if you count hammers and frying pans as friends, which by this point you might. Now for the scholarly debate. Was isolation the greatest challenge of frontier life, or was it just another obstacle among many? Some historians argue that loneliness was a greater threat than hunger or cold. Depression, hallucinations, even what they called mountain madness, sort of frontier-induced cabin fever, were all common. Others claim these men were better suited to solitude than we are today. Hardened, self-reliant, focused. The truth likely sits somewhere in the smoke between pride and desperation. You're not quite losing your mind, but you are shifting, becoming more aware. You start noticing how your own thoughts have a texture, a tone. On quiet nights, you replay old conversations, ones you had years ago. You recite stories your father told you as if he were here, nodding beside the fire. You hum songs you haven't heard since childhood, the melodies drifting through your cabin like half-forgotten ghosts. There's comfort in the predictability. Your routine is everything now. It gives the days shape, the hours purpose. You sharpen your knife every morning. You split kindling in bundles of 7. You count the notches on the wall you carved for each full day alone. The line is getting long, but now and then the quiet cracks. One afternoon you hear footsteps, not yours. You freeze, axe in hand, heart hammering. You move to the window, eyes scanning the clearing. Nothing. No figure. No voice. Just the sound of something moving just beyond the tree line. A twig snaps, then silence. You wait. A long time. Eventually you step outside, snow up to your calves, axe held tight. Still no one. Just the hush of the woods and a fresh set of tracks. Fox or coyote, hard to tell. You relax, but the tension lingers. That strange electric feeling of having almost not been alone. You return to the cabin, close the door, lock it this time. Later you light the fire, warm your hands, and whisper to the hearth. It's just us again. The flames flicker, and you imagine they're nodding. You fall asleep wrapped in furs, the wind pushing at the corners of the roof, and the walls creaking like old friends settling in for the night. You're not sure if you're getting used to the isolation or becoming part of it. Either way, it's quiet, and that quiet somehow feels like home. It's funny, the things you miss. You haven't seen another person in weeks, maybe longer. You stopped counting days after the last snowstorm buried your notch marks under frost. And today, as you scrape the bottom of your stew pot with a flat spoon carved from a chunk of willow, you realize what you miss most isn't conversation, or warmth, or a soft bed. It's salt, that quiet electric sting on the tongue, the way it lifts flavor from bland to something like life. You haven't had real seasoning in days, and suddenly it feels like The worst hardship of them all. Which means only one thing, it's time to trade. You don't take the decision lightly. Leaving the cabin is a risk. You've built a fragile bubble of survival here. Warmth, shelter, food, sometimes. But your supplies are low. Your powder horn's half empty. Your traps are wearing out. Your boots have started to split at the toes, and you've already stitched the soles with gut thread more times than you care to count. And the salt? Gone. They're scraped clean, used down to the last desperate grain. So you pack your gear. The trading post is 2 days' ride east if the trails are passable. You'd heard about it from another trapper months ago, at the last rendezvous. A shack with whiskey, he said, and a man who's never out of bullets. That was enough for you to file it away in your mental map. You don't even know if the post will still be there. Could have burned down, could have been snowed in, could be abandoned, but you won't know until you go. You prep your pack with care. Pelts. Deer, fox, rabbit, one beaver you've been saving for just this kind of moment. You roll them tight, tie them with the sinew, add a few strips of dried meat, a tin cup, a spare flint, and your best shirt, the one with only 2 holes in it. You saddle your horse, check the hooves, tighten the cinch, and whisper something half hopeful into its ear. It stares back like it's heard worse. You lock the cabin door behind you, not that locks matter in the wilderness, but it feels symbolic, like telling the place I'm coming back. Then you ride. The forest is quiet. Snow muffles everything, and your horse's hooves punch through the crust with soft, rhythmic thuds. You follow the river downstream, then cut east through a low valley where the pines stand so close you can barely squeeze between them. It's slow going. The cold bites through your coat. You shift in the saddle every few miles, legs stiff, back aching, eyes scanning every tree like it might jump out and demand a toll. By nightfall you make camp near a frozen spring. You set up a lean-to with your oilcloth, build a fire with kindling from your saddlebag, and boil snow in your tin cup. Dinner is dry meat, bitter tea made from pine needles, and a single roasted onion you found buried under your gear. You eat it like it's cake. You dream of salt. The next day the trail opens up. You find a half-buried path and follow it until the trees thin and the ground levels out. And then, just before dusk, you see it. A low structure nestled against the base of a rocky hill. Smoke curls from the chimney. A tanned hide flaps from a pole above the door like a flag. The trading post. You tie off your horse, pat its side, and step inside. Warmth hits you like a punch. A fire in the corner, dim lantern light, the smell of pipe smoke, sweat, and something cooking that smells suspiciously like raccoon. Behind a rough planked counter stands a man whose beard enters the room before he does. He looks up, doesn't smile, just nods once. You nod back. In this world, that's a full conversation. You lay out your goods, 2 fox pelts, 1 deer, 1 prime beaver. He pokes at them with a grimy finger, grunts, and turns to his shelves. What you get in return: a bag of coarse salt, a pouch of powder and lead, 3 candle stubs, 1 whetstone, and your heart stops coffee. Real coffee. Dry, ground, bitter, smelling magic. You trade 1 more rabbit pelt for a jar of molasses so dark and thick it moves like tar. Worth it. You stay 1 night. Not for comfort, there isn't much, but for the simple relief of hearing another human breathe. You talk a little. The trader tells you about another man who passed through 2 weeks ago, looking for tobacco and a spare boot. You don't ask names, doesn't matter. But knowing someone else is out here, that sticks with you. You leave at dawn, pack heavier, heart lighter. Historical fact: mountain men relied heavily on trading posts for survival, especially in winter. They'd bring furs, primarily beaver but also fox, mink and deer, and exchange them for essentials: salt, gunpowder, lead, needles, coffee, tobacco, sugar, and sometimes even medicine. These outposts were lifelines in the wilderness, often run by former trappers who'd seen enough winters to know better than to stay mobile. Quirky twist: some trading posts had their own currencies, like beaver tokens or tally sticks. Others accepted stories or favours in exchange for goods when supplies ran low. There are tales of trappers performing music, patching roofs, or even giving tattoos in exchange for a handful of coffee or a single brass button. Wilderness economy was less about coins and more about usefulness. And here's your scholarly debate. Were trading posts primarily social hubs or just functional supply stops? Some researchers argue they acted as psychological oases, places where solitary men could connect, gossip, and remember they were human. Others say they were strictly transactional, with conversation kept to a minimum and prices deliberately brutal. Diaries vary. Some describe laughter and storytelling by firelight. Others mention only silence, frost, and the smell of wet fur. You arrive back at your cabin on the third day, exhausted but buzzing. You unload your gear, hang the salt pouch with reverence, and build a fire so hot it feels like summer. You brew coffee in your tin cup, thick, black, glorious, and sit at your wobbly table, hands cupped around the heat like it's your first taste of civilization in a decade. You pour a few grains of salt into a stew and nearly weep. Flavour returns, so does memory. You feel human again, not fancy, not clean, but alive. That night the fire burns low, and you sit by the window staring at the moonlit snow. You're still alone, but knowing others are out there, even just one other man trading for tobacco, is enough to hold back the edges of madness for a little longer. You whisper to the room, "We've got salt again." The cabin creaks, the fire pops, and you swear you hear Margaret the Axe sigh in agreement from the corner. The cold has changed you. Not just in the obvious ways, calloused hands, a beard you could lose a small bird in, as a general scent profile that could be described as wood smoke meets desperation. No, it's deeper than that. You think differently now, slower, quieter, more deliberate. Like the world has taught you that every motion costs energy, and every decision echoes. So when you hear the first crunch of footsteps outside your cabin, human footsteps, you don't rush, you sit still listening, breathing. One hand slowly curling around the grip of your rifle, the other reaching to pull the shutter open a crack. You haven't seen another person since the trading post weeks ago. Out here, footsteps don't come without purpose. They mean a visitor, a stranger, a problem. The figure appears just beyond the tree line, a silhouette against the snow, heavy coat, hat low, a long rifle slung over one shoulder and a pack dragging behind. You ease the shutter shut and step back into the warmth of the fire, unsure whether to be relieved or alarmed. A stranger at your door could be company, could be death. Out here it's often both. A knock, not loud, just 3 slow raps, like the man outside knows better than to demand entry. You wait a moment longer, then open the door. You're both quiet, staring. He's older than you, maybe 50, maybe 60. Weathered skin, grey streak in his beard, eyes like flint. He gives a slow nod, one trapper to another, and says, "Got turned around. Cabin's yours?" You nod. He doesn't step forward. You don't invite him in. There's a long pause where the fire crackles louder than your heartbeat. Then finally, "Got anything to trade?" That's the real question, the only one that matters. You open the door wider, step aside. He enters, shrugs off his snow-caked coat and squats by the fire like he's known it all his life. He lays his pack beside him and starts pulling things out, furs, dried meat, a half-used bar of lye soap, and to your astonishment, a folded sheet of waxed parchment with coffee beans inside. He offers the beans for some salt. You hand it over without blinking. You share a meal, thin stew with rabbit meat, salt, glorious salt, and a touch of the molasses you saved for something just like this. He eats slow, methodical, like a man who doesn't trust the meal to last. You talk, finally. Not much. Names aren't exchanged. He says he came from the west, crossed the Tetons last season, hasn't seen another man in weeks. He speaks like you do now, quiet, efficient, just enough to cover the silence. As night falls, you give him a place to sleep on the floor near the fire. He unrolls his blanket and doesn't say thank you. He doesn't need to. Out here, hospitality is as transactional as trading coffee for salt. You share warmth, and in return you get presence. A human voice, a body that breathes. Historical fact, trappers crossing paths in the wilderness operated under an informal but deeply ingrained code. You didn't knock without cause. You didn't enter without permission. You never asked too many questions. Company was rare, dangerous, and valuable, something to be measured carefully. Sharing a fire meant something. It meant you didn't want to die tonight. And you were willing to pretend for just a few hours that you trusted someone else to watch your back. Quirky twist? There are stories of trappers who spent nights with strangers in the same cabin, sharing meals and warmth, and parted the next morning without ever exchanging names. Some believed names held power, that if you gave yours too freely, it could be used against you. Others just didn't care. In a world this wild, names were luxuries. What mattered was your gear, your traps, your rifle, and whether or not you kept your word. And here's the scholarly debate. Were encounters between mountain men mostly cooperative or hostile? Some historians suggest a deep camaraderie among frontiersmen, a brotherhood forged by shared hardship. Others argue the opposite, that isolation bred suspicion, and every meeting was a gamble. Anecdotal evidence exists for both. Some trappers formed lifelong partnerships. Others shot first and asked questions never. A man stays for 2 nights, long enough to dry his gear, rest his horse, and trade a few more stories. You find out he once worked for the Hudson's Bay Company, briefly, lost 3 toes to frostbite, saw a man drown in a frozen lake trying to retrieve a muskrat trap. He chuckles when he says it, like it's just a footnote in a long, ridiculous life. On the morning of the 3rd day, he packs up quietly and nods once before stepping out into the snow. No handshake, no farewell, just a shared look, one that says, "You're still alive, so am I." That's enough. You watch him disappear into the trees, his footsteps fading into the soft white hush. Then you close the door and sit by the fire, alone again. But something's different now. It's not just the warmth he left behind or the few extra items in your gear pile. It's the reminder that the world isn't entirely made of shadows and wolves, that somewhere out there are others like you, stubborn, weathered, maybe a little mad, still walking through the snow, still surviving. That night, you find yourself talking to the stool again. This time not out of loneliness but habit. You sit at your table, drink a cup of bitter coffee brewed from the stranger's beans, and imagine him out there, tucked under a fir tree or curled into a ravine, drinking his share. You mutter, "Hope he's warm." The fire pops like it agrees, and for the first time in a while you fall asleep smiling. The snow's starting to melt in patches now, revealing the stubborn, half-dead landscape beneath. The twisted roots, the mud, the carcass of a pine branch long since buried. The sun stays out a little longer each day, just enough for you to notice. It's not spring yet, not really, but something in the wind says it's on the way. The trees seem to breathe easier, and you, well, you're still here. Still walking, still carving notches into the log beside the door like a prisoner in a very rustic, very voluntary cell. And then, one morning, you wake up and feel it. Not just the warmth in the air, but the pull, that old restless twitch that says it's time to go somewhere. Not far, just away. Somewhere with people, even if only briefly. Somewhere you can stretch your leg. Maybe hear a new story that didn't come from your own brain. That can mean only one thing. Rendezvous season is coming. You start preparing. Even though you haven't seen anyone since the old trapper with the frostbitten toes, word travels like smoke through the trees. A rendezvous will be held to the north, near a pass by the river's split. Same place as last year, probably. It's unspoken, scattered knowledge. No mail, no maps. Just instinct, memory, and the occasional boot print where it shouldn't be. Rendezvous isn't just a gathering, it's an explosion. A brief, chaotic miracle of noise, barter, song, smoke, spilled whiskey, and lies told at full volume. A place where trappers, traders, natives, and anyone mad enough to live in these hills all descend on a meadow and pretend for a week that they remember how to be social animals. You sort through your goods, furs mostly, rolled, cleaned, brushed until they shine. Your best are 2 fine beaver pelts and a thick winter fox with a coat so white it hurts to look at. You pack dried meat, a little of the molasses, a few carved items you've been tinkering with, a spoon shaped like a snake, a cup with a bear etched into its side, a button made from polished bone. Odd things, trade bait, conversation starters. You dress the part. Your good shirt, meaning the one with fewer than 5 visible stains. You even oil your boots, smooth your beard with bear grease, and string your powder horn with a new leather tie. It's not vanity. It's marketing. You want to look like someone worth trading with, not someone 2 breaths from being mistaken for a cryptid. The journey takes 2 days on foot. The trail is patchy, snow and mud playing tug-of-war under your boots. But you don't mind. Moving feels good again. Necessary. Like the cabin gave you just enough quiet, and now your bones need noise. By the 2nd evening you hear the drums. They're faint at first, barely there beneath the breeze and the bird calls. But as you crest the final ridge, they swell, drums, voices, laughter. Smoke rises in pillars from dozens of campfires. The clearing is alive with tents, lean-tos, and crude shelters. You smell roasted meat, pipe smoke, and unwashed humanity. You grin like an idiot. Welcome to the rendezvous. You step into the chaos like a fish slipping back into water. Men shout over one another, waving pelts, sloshing whiskey, arguing about the value of a muskrat hide like it's international policy. A group of native traders sits near a fire, showing off beadwork and dried herbs. One old mountain man tries to sell a boot he clearly just found on the trail. Another plays a fiddle with 2 strings and calls it music. You pass them all, elbow nodding, bartering, grunting in approval. You even laugh, a real one. It startles you. Historical fact. The annual rendezvous was the lifeblood of the mountain man economy. Starting in the 1820s, fur companies organised massive trading events in remote mountain valleys, bringing together trappers, Native American tribes, and company agents in a swirling mix of commerce and carousing. These gatherings lasted days, sometimes weeks, and often ended with at least one fistfight, one wedding, and someone losing a tooth over a miscounted pelt. Quirky twist? At one famous rendezvous, a trapper tried to trade 2 beaver pelts for a dancing bear. The bear wasn't for sale. It also wasn't tamed. It bit him. He bought it anyway. There are also accounts of trappers showing up in full tuxedos, mud-stained and moth-eaten, but determined to dress up for the occasion. No one could say they lacked flair. And the scholarly debate? Was the rendezvous a true cultural exchange or just a temporary marketplace? Some scholars argue that these gatherings fostered deep, respectful relationships between trappers and native tribes, trade alliances, intermarriage, shared knowledge. Others say it was exploitative, a place where alcohol flowed too freely and trust got bartered away with the furs. Diaries from the time reflect both views, some full of joy, others regret. You spend 2 nights at the rendezvous. You trade your snake spoon for a pouch of tobacco, your fox pelt for a better coat, and your carved cup for a story about a man who swears he met a Wendigo in the hills and lived to limp away. You drink a little, laugh a lot, stumble back to your sleeping roll one night with 2 fresh tins of salt and a pack of candles, feeling almost normal. On the 3rd day, you pack up and head out before sunrise. That's how it goes. You come in silent, you leave the same way. No goodbyes, just nods. Your pack is heavier now, your mood lighter. You walk fast like the mountains are glad to have you back. When you finally see your cabin again, half hidden by fir trees, chimney gently puffing, door still just slightly crooked, you feel it in your chest. Not excitement, not relief, just rightness. Like this is the page you were meant to come back to. The fire's low inside, but waiting. The bed creaks when you sit on it. Your stool hasn't run off. Margaret the axe is still in the corner, smug and sharp. You whisper to the walls, got salt, got stories, got boots that don't leak. The rafters groan, you smile, because now the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. You don't realise it at first, but your cabin's become something more than shelter. It's not just the log walls or the roof, or still half tarp, half sapling slats. Thanks for asking. It's not even the bed, the fire, or the blessedly mouse-free food shelf. No, it's the little things. The way your hand instinctively reaches for the same beam when you rise from your stool. The squeaky board near the hearth that you step over every single time out of sheer respect. The mark on the doorframe where your shoulder clipped it, hard, on day 4, and now you leave it there as a reminder not to move too fast in tight places. This place isn't just yours, it's you, in pine and mud and fire smoke. And now that you've returned from the rendezvous, loaded down with salt, coffee, candles, and enough stories to last you through another winter, you look around and realise you've started decorating. Not with fine art, mind you. The cabin's interior still resembles a well-loved tool shed married to a root cellar, but the signs are there. The rabbit's skull you hung above the door for luck, that's decor now. The old fur you nailed to the wall to block the wind, it's basically tapestry. Even the bones you arranged on the windowsill, all cleaned and bleached by snow, seem less like garbage and more like a theme. Call it frontier brutalism. You carve a new totem one day, just something to keep your hands busy. A small figure, hunched, long-armed, face ambiguous. You place it on the mantel next to your tin cup, and a rock you like the shape of. It feels like a shrine, not to any god, but to the act of being here. You stare at it while your stew bubbles, and for once, you don't feel like you're waiting for anything. The cabin hums with memory now, not loud ones, not dramatic scenes, but echoes of the small and relentless things that make a life. You remember the first time the fire smoked out the whole room. You remember cursing the wind for knocking over your half-built stool. You remember when your traps came back empty 3 days in a row, and you ate pine bark because you thought it was what mountain men did. It isn't. Don't recommend. Even the axe, old Margaret, seems to hold stories in her notches. You find yourself talking to her more now. Not full conversations, just the occasional, that'll do, or good girl after a clean chop. You never expected companionship to take the shape of a sharp blade and a long handle, but here you are. And then there are the stories. You find yourself telling them aloud, even though there's no one to hear them. Stories from the rendezvous, or ones you half remember from years back. You sit by the fire and say things like, "There was a man once said he saw a bear walk on 2 legs clear as a preacher." swore it tipped its hat to him. Or old Frenchy, one-eyed trapper from down south, claimed he could talk to owls, said they knew when a man was going to die, wore feathers in his coat. Looked ridiculous. These aren't just distractions anymore. They're ritual. You tell the stories to the cabin, to the smoke curling in the rafters, to the wind tapping at the shutters like it wants in on the gossip. And in doing so, you make the place feel less like a survival chamber and more like a home, a weird, creaky, occasionally haunted home. Historical fact. Many frontier cabins became places of deep personal meaning to their builders. Carved names in doorframes, antlers mounted above hearths, bones and feathers arranged along window ledges. These weren't just trophies. They were ways to mark time, to assert identity, to anchor a man to a place that could, at any moment, turn on him. Even in the wilderness, humans can't help but decorate. Quirky twist. Some mountain men had strange customs when it came to their cabins. One built a tiny guest chair beside the fire that no one ever sat in, said it was for the spirit of the forest, just in case he drops by. Another kept a journal in charcoal on the inside of his roof beams, crawling up to write upside down like a raccoon with a secret. And one legend tells of a man who built a fake second door just to confuse ghosts. It probably confused the mail carrier too. And the scholarly debate, did mountain men truly form emotional attachments to their cabins? Or were these shelters strictly practical? Some researchers believe these homes were loved, personalized, even mourned when abandoned. Others argue that the lifestyle discouraged attachment. Trappers moved often, burned cabins when they left, or simply let nature reclaim them. But the truth lies in the details. The carvings, the charms, the bones placed just so. A man doesn't decorate a place he doesn't care about. You spend one whole afternoon arranging your mantle, the shelf you made from a flat log wedged between two beams. You place the totem front and centre. A small stone you found by the creek goes next. Your best candle, short squat still scented with pine pitch, sits to the left, unlit, saved for some future night when you feel fancy. You even carve a small plaque, just a single word, still. You nail it above the door. Not home, not freedom, just still. As in, still standing, still here, still breathing. You sweep the floor with a pine branch, fold your blankets, rehang the fur that fell off the wall 2 days ago. Everything's just a little cleaner, a little more chosen. You even scrub the soot from around the hearthstones with a wet rag, which feels absurdly civilized, like you're preparing for guests. Of course there won't be any, but still, that night, as you stretch out on your creaky bed, you look around the cabin and see more than survival. You see a place shaped by your hands, by your moods, by your stubborn refusal to leave. A place filled with pieces of you, broken off slowly like bark from a tree. The wind howls, the shutters rattle. Margaret leans against the wall, quiet and dignified. You whisper, still. The cabin groans, and you sleep like a man who built his own sanctuary out of cold, hunger, and bone. The wind is different today, not softer, smarter. It moves through the trees like it knows something you don't. You feel it in your bones before you even open the door. A pressure in the air, a silence between the birdsong like the mountain is holding its breath. You step outside and scan the horizon, and there, just past the pines, is a thin column of smoke. Not yours. You freeze. It's far, miles maybe, but it's there, unmistakable. Not a campfire. Too big. And not from the rendezvous site either. That ended weeks ago. This is something else. You stare at it longer than you mean to, letting the cold bite into your cheeks, your fingertips twitching near your belt. Whoever built that fire isn't hiding. That's a message. One that says, I'm here. You go back inside slowly. Close the door. Sit on your stool. You don't panic. Panic wastes calories. But your thoughts run fast and sharp, cutting through the quiet like your knife through last week's jerky. Is it another trapper? Possible. Is it a trader? Unlikely. A lost traveller? Could be, but there's a fourth option. One you don't like to think about. One that stands at the edge of every shadow out here. Someone desperate. Desperate men don't knock. They don't barter. They take. You check your rifle first, powder dry, barrel clean. You load it with care, muscle memory taking over. Then you check the traps around your clearing, still empty, no fresh prints, no broken lines. You reinforce the latch on the door, you close the shutter, then you wait. 2 days pass, the smoke doesn't rise again. And then, just as you're beginning to think it was nothing more than a flickering shadow in the mind, footsteps. slow, crunching, confident. You stand in silence, rifle ready, back against the wall, your breath shallow. A single knock, not polite, not hesitant, just expected. You open the door a sliver, and there he is. A young man, maybe mid-20s, wrapped in layers that don't quite match, like he dressed in a hurry or from someone else's wardrobe. His boots are wrong for this terrain. He carries no pack, his rifle looks old, even by your standards. His eyes are hollow, sunken deep, like something behind them gave up weeks ago. Need food, he says. You say nothing, just stare. He doesn't step forward. Smart. Lost my gear, been walking 4 days. Still you say nothing. He glances behind him as if checking for something. Then back to you. Can trade. You rehearse your rifle slightly. Not aimed, just ready. Not here to steal, he adds quickly. Just hungry. You believe him. Mostly. But you've also seen hunger turn decent men into something else entirely. After a long pause, you step back, gesture him in. Not because you trust him, but because you remember what it felt like, that first real storm, your belly empty and your fingers numb. He steps inside slowly, cautiously, like the walls might bite. You watch him scan the cabin, your bed, your fire, your tools. He sees the axe, still leaning in her usual spot. You watch his eyes linger on her a beat too long. You feed him. Not much, just a bit of stew. Some hard bread, a pinch of salt like a crown on top. He eats it like it's sacred. When he's done, he mutters thanks, eyes down. You ask him his story. He gives you pieces. Lost his horse, got separated from his brother, was heading north but took a bad trail. The usual half-truths that all blend together into something that might be real, or not. Historical fact, encounters like this weren't rare. The frontier was full of wanderers, some honest, some lost, some dangerous. Mountain men knew to be cautious. Hospitality was offered sparingly and always with one eye on the door. Still, stories of kindness persisted. Trappers who shared food. Cabins left unlocked with supplies for the next soul passing through. In a land that could kill you just for forgetting to bank your fire, survival sometimes depended on the mercy of strangers. Quirky twist? There are accounts of trappers pretending to be crazier than they really were, just to avoid being robbed. One man reportedly talked to a sack of potatoes for a week straight, while a stranger was nearby muttering things like, "Don't you judge me, Hank, I'll skin you next." The stranger left before morning. No one took anything. Scholarly debate? Some argue the wilderness built a sort of rough honor code, a don't steal, don't kill, or you'll never last philosophy. Others say that was wishful thinking, and that most trappers were loners because they didn't want to risk trust. The truth likely lies in the middle. Generosity, but always with conditions, a full belly, but a locked powder horn. You let the man sleep near the fire. You don't sleep much, you sit upright in your bed, your rifle across your lap, one eye on the door, one ear on his breathing. He shifts in his sleep, mutters something about a ridge and a trail that never ends. By morning he's gone, took nothing, left nothing, just his footprints in the melting snow and the faint memory of another voice echoing off your cabin walls. You're not sure if he ever meant harm, or if he was just one of the countless ghosts that wander through these woods. Flesh and bone wrapped around some shattered piece of hope. You check your supplies, everything's in place. The salt untouched. Margaret still leans against the wall like the old matriarch she is. You step outside, breathe in the morning, and follow the footprints just long enough to see that he headed west, toward the low trail that leads back to nowhere. You go back inside, close the door, and sit by the fire. The cabin creaks like it's exhaling. You whisper, "Still standing." Then you stir the stew, add a little salt, and sit quietly as the smoke drifts upward, toward the rafters, toward the ghosts, toward the next knock that may or may not come. Spring doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, you see, like a guest unsure if it's welcome. One day there's ice in your water bucket, and the next there's none. Then the snow at the edge of the clearing recedes a little farther. You hear a bird, just one, then another. You wake to sunlight not filtered through breath-frosted windows, but actual warm light, soft and golden, draped across the floor like a blanket. You stretch without thinking, and you don't shiver. That's new. Your cabin smells different too. Not the heavy, smoky scent of survival, but something lighter. Pine, wet dirt, sap, life returning bit by bit. You open the door and step out barefoot just to feel the ground again. It's still cold, still rough, but the earth doesn't bite like it did. It holds you. Your woodpile is low, but you're not panicking anymore. You cut logs now because you want to, not because you probably must. The urgency has shifted. It's not about keeping death out anymore. It's about getting ahead. There's an ease in your movements, a looseness in your shoulders. You catch yourself humming one morning as you sharpen your knife. Not because you're happy, necessarily, just because there's finally room in your mind for sound. Inside, you begin to rearrange things, not out of boredom, out of ritual. The winter layout was designed for efficiency. Now you want comfort. You move the bed closer to the window to catch the morning light. You repack your gear, clean every tool, reseal the seams of the roof, not because the next storm is coming, but because it isn't. This shift isn't just seasonal, it's spiritual. You've been here long enough that the cabin has become more than wood and mud. It's a reflection now, of your hands, your choices, your mind, and you realise your future. Because now comes the question you've been dodging all winter. Will you stay? It arrives quietly, not as a panic, not as a longing for escape, just as a flicker of thought. A shadow at the edge of your firelight. Do I go back? Back to what, though? Civilization? Crowds? A name shouted across a muddy street by someone who doesn't know what you've built? Do you miss people? Do you miss their noise, their closeness, their smell? You're not sure. You've spent so long surviving that imagining anything else feels weirdly fragile. You sit at your table and list the reasons to leave. Salt's easier to get. Fewer bears, less mould. You might find a woman who doesn't mind that you smell like pine and dried elk. You could sell your furs for silver and sleep in a bed where the sheets were woven, not just scraped from deer hide. And yet, here, no one tells you what to do. You answer only to the wind, the trees, the seasons. You sleep when tired, eat when hungry, and speak only when you feel like it. Your mind is quieter now, not soft, but settled, like a lake after the storm has passed. Historical fact. Many mountain men did eventually return to civilization. Some became guides for Western settlers. Some opened trading posts or served as scouts in military expeditions, but others stayed in the wilds, unable or unwilling to return. They became legends, footnotes, ghosts. Their cabins eventually rotted, but their stories stuck around, half factual, half folklore. Quirky twist: one famous trapper built a second cabin just 100 yards from the first. When asked why, he reportedly said, "The first one knows too much." Another painted his walls with crushed berries and ash, creating primitive murals of bison, stars, and dreams he couldn't put into words. The wilderness didn't just change them, it absorbed them. And here's your scholarly debate. Was the choice to remain in the wild an act of freedom or of loss? Some argue it was liberation, living without laws, borders, or clocks. Others say it was exile in disguise, that these men were running from something. War, family, failure, or simply the noise of a world they never belonged to. The truth? Maybe both. Maybe that's why the mountains still feel haunted. You step outside with your coffee, yes, real coffee, still miraculously left from the rendezvous, and sit on a stump you've claimed as your porch chair. The air is clean. The birds are back. Somewhere in the woods, a distant creek sings over thawed stones. You watch a fox trot through the clearing, nose to the wind, tail high. It doesn't even glance at you, just moves past like you're part of the landscape now. And maybe you are. You consider carving a new sign, something to hang over the door. The old one still works, but now maybe home. Or maybe nothing, just the crack of the fire and the wind in the trees, telling your story better than words ever could. You spend the afternoon planting a few seeds in a small stubborn patch of dirt near the edge of the cabin, not because you need them to survive, but because you want to see what grows. That night you light one of your last candles, not for light, but for ceremony. You place it on your shelf next to the little totem, the stone and the bare-etched cup. You watch it flicker. You feel no fear. There is no audience. There is no plan. Just you and the world you built from nothing. You close your eyes and whisper to no one, "I might just stay." And the silence answers, "You already have." So here you are, full circle. From the first cold night under a pine needle roof to the morning you stepped barefoot into spring, this cabin, this mountain, this space between one heartbeat and the next, it's all yours now. You built it, you braved it. You endured everything the wilderness had to throw at you. Hunger, snow, silence, foxes with too much attitude, mysterious visitors, and the occasional existential crisis triggered by a frozen bannock. But more than that, you adapted. You learned what kind of man listens to the fire talk, what kind of man speaks back. You figured out how to read the trees, how to make peace with the wind, how to use every part of a rabbit, and how to tell stories even when there's no one to hear them, or maybe because there's no one to hear them. There was no dramatic ending, no final bear fight, no epic cabin showdown. Just you, alone, changing slowly, quietly, like a log rotting into soil, like winter melting into spring, and maybe that's the point. You didn't just survive the wilderness, you became part of it. Now, the forest doesn't intimidate you, the silence doesn't taunt you. The crack in the door, the draft under the wall, the snow collecting on the roof, none of it feels like failure anymore. It just feels like home. So when people ask, if they ever do, how mountain men built cabins from scratch, the answer won't be just axes and logs. It'll be time, repetition, a little madness, a lot of stubbornness, and more than a few one-sided conversations with a cooking pot. And if they ask how you lasted, how you did it, how you came through the winter with all your fingers and a few grains of salt left, you'll just shrug and say, still standing. Now go ahead, roll over, pull that blanket a little tighter, and let the sound of the wind remind you of what it means to be wild and warm and exactly where you're supposed to be.